In 1836, a woman in England could be counted twice. Once in the parish register when she was born, and once in the burial book when she was finished. Everything in between belonged to whoever held the deeds. Honora Sowerby knew this the way she knew the price of hops at Ledbury Market, which is to say exactly, and to the shilling. She was 26. She owned one gown fit for church, her dead mother's thimble, and 10 years of other people's arithmetic written in her own hand. Every morning her aunt weighed the coal on the letter scales before the fire was lit. Every morning her aunt said the same thing. No man marries a column of figures. She was not wrong. Men married land. Men married 3% in the funds, and a father who could be leaned upon. Nobody in that county had ever married a woman for her handwriting. But her handwriting was the only thing in that house anyone had ever asked her for. And by the following summer, it would be the thing that hanged her, and the thing that saved her, and she would not know which until the room went quiet. Good thing the man who came down from London that autumn had not come to marry anybody. He had come to find out who was robbing him. He was a duke, and he had already been walking her boundary for 3 days. The scales on the estate office table at Cold Harbor Grange had been made for weighing letters. Small brass pan, small brass counterweights, a beam no longer than a man's hand. They had belonged to Honora's grandfather, who had used them to work out the postage on his correspondence, back when the house still had correspondence worth paying for. Lavinia Pargeter used them for coal. She did it every morning at 7:30 in the cold, before Sarah was permitted to lay the fire. She would take the scuttle in both hands, set it on the floor beside her chair, and lift the lumps out one at a time with the sugar tongs. Each lump went into the brass pan. Each weight was entered into a small ruled book in her own square upright hand. 4 ounces, 6 ounces, 3 ounces, and a note beside it that the third was more slate than coal and ought to be taken off the merchant's account. Honora sat at the other end of the table with the household ledger open in front of her and added up October. She had learned long ago not to watch the weighing. It was not the meanness that was hard to sit through. Meanness was ordinary, and in a house with no money it was arguably good management. It was the ceremony. Her aunt did not simply burn less coal. She burned it in front of an audience, with instruments, so that the audience should understand what it cost to keep her alive. Butcher, Honora said. 9 and 4. 9 and 4 for what? Neck of mutton twice. Suet. There was no suet in October. There was suet on the 11th. It went into the pudding on the 12th, which you ate. The tongs paused over the scuttle. Lavinia Pargeter was 58 that autumn, and had a face that had never been soft even in the portrait over the stairs, where she was 22 and holding a spaniel and looking at the painter as though he had overcharged her. She had buried a husband 5 years ago and had not, so far as Honora could tell, missed him once. You have a memory like a debt collector, Lavinia said. It is the same work, Honora said. Do not be clever before breakfast. It sours the milk. Honora went back to the column. Chandler, 4 and 6. Blacksmith, 2 shillings, for the hinge on the wagon shed door that Crispin had let hang crooked for a year until the wood split. She wrote the figures small and even and did not blot, because paper cost money and she was the one who would be told about it. There was a second arithmetic she had been doing since she was 19, and it was not in the ledger. Her keep came to perhaps £14 a year. Against it she kept the accounts, wrote the tenant notices, drew up the tithe returns, checked the corn merchant's bills, and managed the hop ground and the orchard from bud to sale, which if her uncle had lived to pay a man for it would have cost him £40 and a cottage. So the ledger she was permitted to write in said she was owed nothing and given everything, And the ledger she was not permitted to write in said the exact reverse, and neither would ever be shown to a soul. The fire, when Sarah was finally let in to light it, gave out a heat that reached about as far as the fender and then gave up. Lavinia shut her coal book. "Lady Chilcote called yesterday," she said. Honora did not look up. That was a mistake, and she knew it as she made it, because looking up was the small tribute that bought a shorter sentence. "She asked after you," Lavinia said. "She asked whether you were much occupied. I said you were a great help to me in the house. Do you know what she said then?" "No," she said, of course. "Poor thing," and changed the subject to her greenhouse. "Poor thing. That is what you are in that woman's mouth. 2 words and then a greenhouse." Honora dipped the pen. "You might have made something of yourself at 20, Lavinia said. "You had a waist and your mother's mouth, and there was a curate who would have taken you with 60 pounds if your uncle had been able to find 60 pounds. You would not have him. He had a way of asking questions he already knew the answers to," Honora said. "I would have been correcting him for 40 years, and instead, you will be correcting me." Lavinia stood. She took up the coal book and tucked it under her arm the way a general takes up a map. "You are 26, and you have not one thing in this world that a man could be shown. Not an acre, not 100 pounds, not so much as a good temper. Understand me, Honora. No man marries a column of figures." Honora heard the door close, and the tap of her aunt's shoe on the flag of the passage, and after a while the silence of the house came back and settled on her shoulders like a wet coat. She finished the column. She ruled it off. She wiped the pen, corked the ink, and set the ledger on the shelf with the others. 1,829 to 1,836. 7 volumes of a life in another woman's service. Then she put on her cloak and went out to the hop store, because the last of the season's figures were still in her apron on a folded scrap of paper, and there was one book in that house that was hers. It was a stitched quarto with a marbled board, come loose at the top corner, and on the first page, in a rounder and younger hand than she now wrote, it said Hop Ground and Orchard Sea, Grange, from the spring of 1,828. She had begun it at 18 because her uncle told her to stop asking about the yield and go and find out for herself. He had meant it as a dismissal. She had taken it as an instruction. Every year since, on a plank shelf in the cold of the hop store, she had written down what came off the ground. Not what was sold, not what was paid. What came off the ground in the week it came off, with the weather beside it and the name of the man who carted it. She trimmed the candle and opened to the fresh page. 1,836. Picking begun the 5th of September, ended the 17th. Weather dry to the 9th, then broken. Buying good on the south rows, mold in the low corner as in 1,834. Sample bright, carted by Tom Rudge on the 19th and the 20th. Then, underneath the line that mattered, 41 pockets. Sold at Ledbury the 4th of October at £4 and 12 shillings the hundredweight. She looked at it a moment before she blotted it, and felt the small unreasonable satisfaction she always felt and could never have explained to anybody. It was not pride in the crop was not hers, and the money was not hers, and the ground was not hers. It was simply that the number was true. Crispin Pargeter came back from Hereford on the Thursday with a pamphlet in his greatcoat pocket, and he was so pleased with himself that he was almost civil at dinner. He was 33 that year, Lavinia's only son, fair, heavy in the shoulder, a little loose already about the jaw. He had been managing Cold Harbor since his father died in 1,831, and he managed it the way a man plays cards with someone else's money, boldly and without much attention to the arithmetic, because Honora did the arithmetic. He waited until the cloth was drawn to bring the pamphlet out. He liked an audience even when it was 2 women and a candle. "It has passed," he said, "in August. I have the whole of it here." Lavinia held out her hand, and he gave it to her, and she turned it about and read the title on the wrapper and gave it back because she could read a bill of exchange at 40 paces and had never once read anything else. "Tell it," she said. He spread it on the cloth. Honora went on with her mending and listened, which was her position in that room and had been for 10 years. Crispin explained things to his mother, and Honora was in the corner in the same way the coal scuttle was in the corner. "It is the tithe," he said. "All of it. Every parish in England. They mean to be done with the 10th sheaf and the 10th fleece and the 10th of everything else forever. No more of the parson's man standing in the field counting off my lambs. In place of it there will be a sum of money, a rent charge, fixed." "And who fixes it?" said Lavinia. "Here is the whole beauty of the thing." Crispin turned the pamphlet round so that the candle fell on it, although his mother did not look. "There are 2 roads. The commissioners may send a man down to value the parish and impose whatever he likes, and God help us all. Or the parish may agree it among themselves first, a voluntary agreement. If 2/3 of the landowners agree, reckon not by heads but by the value of their land, and if the owners of the tithes agree also, then we settle the figure ourselves and send it up, and it is confirmed."
2/3 by value, Lavinia said slowly. 2/3 by value.
Chilcote and I between us are the better part of that before another soul opens his mouth. "And the figure. How is the figure got?" Crispin sat back. This was the part he had been saving. "By the average," he said. "They take the 7 years ending at Christmas 1,835, and they take what the tithe was worth in each of them, and the average of the 7 is the charge. Forever, not for a term, not until the next war or the next act. Forever, mother, on the same ground, at the same money, while corn goes up and hops go up, and the value of every acre in this county goes up with them." For a moment, nobody said anything, and Honora, who had not lifted her head from the seam, understood the whole of it at once and felt something go quietly cold in her chest, although she could not yet have said why. 7 years, she said. They both looked round as though the fire screen had spoken. 1,829 to 1,835, Crispin said. "Yes," Honora said. "I know when they are. I wrote them." She had, too. Every tithe return that had gone out of that house since 1,829 had gone out in her hand, because her uncle's writing had grown shaky and Crispin's was a disgrace, and there was a woman in the house who wrote a fair, clear script and cost nothing. Crispin smiled. It was not a cruel smile. That was the thing about Crispin that took people in for years, and had taken Honora in for some of them. He was not cruel. He was merely a man who had never in his life met an obstacle he could not walk round, and who did not think of the people he walked over as obstacles, or indeed as people. "Then you will not mind writing them again," he said. "That is what I was going to ask you. The commissioners will want the whole 7 years set out fair and clean in one hand, with the produce and the prices and the composition, and they will want it before the parish meets. It is a month of evenings, perhaps 6 weeks. I have the household books to keep as well. You have nothing else in the world to do." "That is not the same as having nothing to do," Honora said. Lavinia's spoon came down on the saucer with a small, precise click. Crispin held up both hands, laughing. "Peace. Name your price, then. What do you want?" He was joking. She knew he was joking, and she knew he expected her to look at the floor and say nothing. And she was very tired that night, and so she said it. "Coal," she said. "What?" 200 weight. Brought up before Christmas, and put in my room, and not weighed." The kitchen went on rattling somewhere below them. Lavinia's face did a thing Honora had seen perhaps 4 times in 10 years, a kind of flinch inward, as though she had been shown herself in a glass she had not expected. Crispin laughed again, delighted, and slapped the table. "Done," he said. 200 weight of coal for 7 years of figures. You are the cheapest clerk in Herefordshire, cousin. I am aware, Honora said. But I was 12 and worked wherever there was work, which in Marl Ashton meant the hop ground in September, the orchard in October, and graves for the sexton whenever the ground was soft. His mother took in washing. His father had gone for a soldier in 1830 and had written twice. He came up to the hop store on the Saturday because Honora had told him she would pay him a penny to help stack the poles, and because he had worked out the previous summer that Miss Sowerby was the only person on that estate who told him true things. They worked in the doorway, where the light was, tearing the dead vine away in long brown ropes, and when the poles were stacked, she took him to the beam scale at the back of the store. "Come here," she said. "I want to show you something, and I want you to remember it." He came. He was a narrow boy with a permanently running nose and a way of holding still when he was interested, which she liked. She set a sealed weight on the pan. "That," she said, "is 56 pounds. It is stamped by the county and it is right. Now look at the beam." He looked, and his face changed. "It aren't level," he said. "No. It is out by about 4 pounds against us, and when Mr. Rudge carts our hops away, he weighs them on it and pays us on it. 4 pounds in the pocket. 41 pockets. What is that?" Bat's lips moved. "160-odd pound of hops," he said, "give or take. And at £4.12 the hundredweight, that is near 7 pounds of money that walked out of that door this autumn, and nobody in the house but me knows it happened. Why did nobody know it?" "Because nobody weighed it," he said. "Because nobody weighed it. Everybody in this parish believes what is written down. Almost nobody checks what is written down against the thing itself. That is the whole of the difference between people who are robbed and people who are not, and it has nothing to do with being clever." Bat considered the beam with real hostility, as though it had insulted his mother. "Can I learn the figures proper?" he said. "The reading of a bill and that?" "You can. Come Sundays after the service and bring a slate." She gave him his penny. Then she thought a moment and said the other thing, the thing she had been taught by nobody at all, and had worked out for herself at 19 with a corn merchant's bill in her hand and no one to complain to. And Bat, when a man gives you a paper, any paper, a receipt, a note of hand, a chit for a load of anything, do not throw it away. Not ever. Not if it is a year old and dirty and means nothing to you. Keep it in a box. What for? Because you will not know which one matters, Honora said, until long after the day you could have got another. The gate on the Ledbury Road came down on the last Tuesday in October, and it came down in the rain. It was the boundary gate at the bottom of the long field, oak, hung on a post that had been rotting quietly at the ground line for 2 winters, while Crispin said he would see to it. Honora had written it in the estate book 3 times. There is a particular sensation in writing a thing down for the 3rd time, and it is not satisfaction. She went out at 4 in the afternoon because Rudge's sheep were in the next field, and the gap was wide enough for the lot of them, and because the alternative was another hour in a room with her aunt. The rain came at her sideways off the Malverns. By the time she reached the bottom of the field, the hem of her cloak weighed as much as a small child. The gate lay half in the mud, with the post leaning over it like a drunk over a table, and the top hinge had torn its screws clean out of the wood. She got her shoulder under the head of the gate and lifted, and the wet oak went nowhere at all. She tried it 3 times. On the 3rd time, her boot went out from under her, and she came down hard on one knee in the clay, and knelt there a moment in the rain, with her hands flat in the cold of it and her hair coming down, and then she got up and kicked the post as hard as she could. "That will not answer," said a voice from the road. She turned round. There was a traveling carriage stopped on the far side of the hedge, black. Its near hind wheel dropped into the ditch to the axle, and two horses standing in the shafts with their heads down and steam coming off them. A coachman was crouched at the wheel, doing something useless with a fence rail. And on the road, 10 feet away, with his hat in his hand and the rain flattening his hair to his head, stood a man. He was tall and stood like a man who had never waited for permission to be anywhere. His coat had cost more than the gate, the post, the hinge, and the field. He looked somewhere past 30, dark, with a long face and pale eyes, and an expression of frank, undisguised interest that she disliked immediately. "I beg your pardon," Honora said. "Did you speak?" "I said kicking it will not answer. The post is gone at the foot. You could put your whole weight against it until Michaelmas, and it would only lean further. I am aware of what is wrong with it. Then may I ask what the kicking was for?" Honora pushed the wet hair off her face with the back of a hand and left a stripe of clay across her forehead in the doing of it. "It was for me," she said. Something happened in the man's face. It was quick, and it was not what she expected, because what she expected was the small tightening of the mouth that meant a gentleman had decided a woman was coarse. What she got was the look of a man who has picked up a book he assumed he had read. "Ah," he said. "Yes, I have kicked a great many things for that reason. Your wheel is in the ditch." "It is." "Your man will not have it out with a fence rail." "He will not." "No, he has been persuading me of that for 20 minutes without knowing it." "There is a wheelwright in Marl Ashton, and a smith beside him," Honora said. 2 miles that way, past the church. The inn is the Bell and Hop Yard, and it is dry, and the ale is not poisonous. If you send him now, he will be back before dark. If you send him in half an hour, he will not." The man turned his head and said something to the coachman, quite quietly, and the coachman dropped the rail and set off up the road at a trot. Then he climbed over the low stone wall into the field, which she had not invited him to do, and came and looked at the gate. "You have the post to get back into the socket first," he said. "And the gate is holding it out of true because you have let the head of it down into the mud. Lift the head. I will bring the post up. I did not ask for help." "No," he said. "You told me about a wheelwright, and a smith, and an inn, and where the church was. And you did not tell me your name, which I take to mean you would like me to be somewhere else within the hour. I am trying to be somewhere else within the hour. It will go faster if the gate is standing." Honora looked at him for a second longer. Then she bent and got both hands under the head of the gate. He put his shoulder to the post. He did it properly, low, with his back straight, like a man who had been shown how at some point by somebody who did not care that he was rich. The post came up out of the mud with a long sucking noise, and she swung the head of the gate across, and he dropped the foot of the post into the socket, and it went in with a knock she felt in her wrists. He held it. She wedged a flat stone at the base with her boot, and then a second, and then a wedge of split oak from the hedge bottom, and stood back. "It will stand a week," she said. "Not more. A week is a great deal more than it had this morning." They were both breathing hard. The rain was coming off the brim of his hat in a steady thread. His hands, when he took them off the post, were black to the wrist, and he looked at them with an expression of mild, scientific surprise. "You are not a laborer's wife," he said. "No, you gave me the road to the church without thinking about it, and you knew the hinge had torn rather than the socket. So you know this ground. I have known it since I was 6. And you are out in this alone with no man mending a gate you did not break." "That," said Honora, "was very nearly a question, and I do not think you have earned one yet." He laughed. It came out of him all at once and surprised them both. "Forgive me," he said. "I have been 3 days in this county being agreed with by everybody I meet, and it has made me clumsy. Will you tell me your name?" There was a version of that afternoon in which she told him, and she thought about it afterwards more than she liked to admit. But she was 26 years old, and on her knees in a field, in the rain, in a cloak she had turned twice. And her aunt was 200 yards away in a house where the coal was weighed. And this man's boots alone would have kept that house in fire until Lady Day. "Do you know what would happen?" she said, "if I gave you my name and you were civil enough to come and pay a call?" "I confess I do not." "My aunt would put out the good cups. She would light a fire she cannot afford. She would talk about my mother's family for an hour. And when you had gone, she would spend a fortnight explaining to me every way in which I had disgraced her in front of a rich man. And she would be right about some of them, and I would have to sit and hear it. That is what your civility costs, sir. It is not expensive for you." He stood in the rain and did not answer for a moment. "That is the plainest thing anybody has said to me this year," he said at last. "I find lying takes a great deal of energy," Honora said, "and I have very little to spare." She picked up her stick from the hedge bottom. He was still holding his hat, and had been the whole time, which she had not noticed until then, and which annoyed her in a way she did not care to examine. "2 miles that way," she said, "past the church. And your name?" "No," she said, and she went up the long field in the rain without looking back, and if she had looked back she would have seen him standing at the gate she had mended, not looking at the gate at all. Ledbury Market on a Thursday in the first week of November smelled of wet sacking, sheep, and cider going slowly off in the back of somebody's cart. Honora went in with Rudge and the last of the keeping apples, 14 bushels of foxwhelp that were too spotted to store and would do for the press, and she got 2 and 9 a bushel for them, which was a shilling better than Crispin had told her to accept, and 3d worse than she had wanted. She wrote it on the back of her hand in pencil because she had no paper, and she stood a while at the corner by the market house with her basket, listening. That was the other reason she came to Ledbury, not the apples. A market is the only place in England where the truth about money is spoken out loud, and it is spoken by men who do not know they are doing it in the ordinary way of complaining. She had been coming since she was 16, and standing where the factors stood. 2 hop factors were talking behind her about Wyholme. She knew Wyholme, the northern quarter of the parish, up the slope past the church, a south-facing shoulder of red marl that had grown hops since anybody's grandfather. The great tithes of it did not belong to the parson. They had been sold away from the church 300 years ago, in the way such things were, and had ended in the hands of a duke in Suffolk who had never seen the place. "He has taken it into his own hand," the older factor was saying. "Turned off Bewley, who had the lease of it, and taken it into his own hand. After all this while. Sent his man down in the summer, and now he has come himself. He is at Marlingford with Lord Chilcote this month. What does a duke want in Marl Ashton?" "I should think," said the older factor, "that he wants to know why a quarter of that parish, which is as good hop ground as any in the county, has been sending him up a tithe worth less than the sour end of Bosbury." The younger one laughed. "Perhaps he cannot count. He has people to count for him. That is rather the difficulty for somebody." They moved off toward the Feathers. Honora stood where she was with her empty basket on her arm and did a sum. She knew what Wyholme grew because she had stood at the top of the long field every August of her life and looked across at it. She knew what hops had made at Ledbury in every year since 1828 because she had been standing in this square when they made it. She could not have said within £100 what the great tithes of that quarter were worth. But she could say in a moment that they were worth a great deal more than the sour end of Bosbury. Coldharbour's own returns went out in her hand. Wyholm's did not. Wyholm was nothing to do with her. But they had one thing in common, and it had not occurred to her before that afternoon, standing in the wet under the market house, that it was a thing worth noticing. The man who drew up the tithe accounts for the whole of Marl Ashton parish, and had done since 1829, and who took them round to the parson to be signed, and who sent them up to whoever was owed, was her cousin Crispin. The vestry of Marl Ashton was too cold to meet in, and the church was colder. So when the parish had business, it went to the Bell and Hop Yard, and sat in the long room over the tap, where the landlord kept a fire, because the fire sold ale. Honora went because Josiah Kembleford asked her to. The rector was 71, and his hand had gone. He had been at Marl Ashton since 1798, and had baptized most of the men who would be sitting in that room. And he could still read the service without his glasses. But he could no longer write 2 pages without the letters walking off the line. Since 1832, he had paid Honora 4 shillings a quarter to make the fair copies of the parish books, and had come to rely on her the way a man relies on a stick, without noticing that he leans. "Take it down as they say it," he told her on the steps, "not as they mean it. If I try to remember it after, I shall remember what I wish them to have said." She took the seat at the end of the long table by the window, the coldest seat and the one nobody wanted, and set out the parish inkstand and a quire of paper. They came in by 1s and 2s. Farmers first in their market coats, smelling of the road. Then Chilcote, who was 60 and gouty and the second largest owner in the parish, and had never once had to be anywhere on time. Then Crispin, last, as he always contrived to be last. There were 14 of them, and Honora was the only woman, and not one man thought anything of it, because she was not there as a person. She was there as the pen. Crispin stood up and told them about the act, and he did it well. He had a way of putting a thing so that the man he was speaking to felt clever for following it. And by the time he reached the 7-year average, there were farmers nodding along who could not have told you the difference between a tithe and a rate. Then Chilcote asked the question that mattered, in the bored voice of a man who has done the sum already, and who is to agree it. 2/3 by value, you said. 2/3 of the landowners reckoned by the value of their land. Crispin ticked them off on his fingers. Your lordship. Myself for Coldharbour. Bagnall. The Whately trustees. That is very near the whole of it, before we trouble anybody else. And the tithe owners must agree also. They must. Mr. Kembleford holds the greater part. Kembleford said nothing at all. Honora noticed it because she was writing. And when a man says nothing, you write nothing. And the blank space on the page has a shape to it. And the rest, said Chilcote. The rest is the Wyholm portion, Crispin said, and it is out of the parish altogether so far as trouble goes. It has been let to Beeley these 12 years, and Beeley takes what he is given and asks no questions. The owner has never in his life set foot in this county. There was a small amount of laughter. The door at the end of the room opened. Honora had her head bent over the line she was finishing, and so she heard him before she saw him, which was worse. Then he has been remiss, said a voice. She had last heard through rain. I am told he is trying to make up for it. She looked up. He had a dry coat on this time, and his hair was brushed, and the effect was not to make him look more like a duke, but less like a person. The pale eyes went round the room, taking the count of it, and passed over her, and stopped, and came back. She did not move her face. She had had a great deal of practice at not moving her face. Chilcote was already up and halfway down the room, gout and all. Aldringham. My dear fellow, you might have sent word. Gentlemen, His Grace the Duke of Aldringham, who is the impropriator of the Wyholm portion, and who is my guest at Marlingford this month. Every man in the room stood up. The bench legs shrieked on the boards. Honora stood up too, because to remain seated would have been a statement she could not afford, and she felt the exact moment when Crispin, who had gone very slightly still at the head of the table, followed the Duke's eyes down the length of it and found them resting on his cousin. "Sit, gentlemen, please," the Duke said. "I have interrupted. Mr. Pargeter, I believe. Go on." Crispin went on and did not go on as well. It was a small difference, and probably nobody caught it but Honora, who had been reading her cousin's face across a dinner table for 10 years. He put the same words in the same order, and they came out a quarter of an inch stiffer. And twice he looked at the roll of paper under his hand as though checking it was still rolled. Because there was a map. He unrolled it when he came to the apportionment and weighted the corners with 2 inkwells and a tankard, and it was the old parish survey of 1,802 with the tithe boundaries laid over it in a faded red line, and Honora had never in her life seen it laid flat. She had known Wyholm was up the hill past the church. Everybody knew that. Wyholm was the name of a farm and a slope and a quarter of a parish, and it was somebody else's. The red line did not go round the farm. It went round the old manor of Wyholm as it had stood before the monasteries fell, and manors did not follow field gates. It came down off the hill and crossed the Ledbury Road and took in the top of the long field and the whole of the hop ground and the orchard as far as the barn, and then it turned and went back up. 2/3 of the ground she had worked since she was 18 lay inside the red line, which meant that every pocket of hops she had ever weighed on that crooked beam in the store, and every bushel of foxwhelp she had ever carted to Ledbury, had owed its 10th not to Josiah Kembleford, who was old and kind and half blind, but to a man in Suffolk who had never seen the place, to the man standing at the other end of the table, with his hands behind his back, listening. Honora made herself write the next sentence and got 2 words down before she understood that her hand had stopped. She had thought, at Ledbury, that she had noticed something interesting about her cousin. She had not. She had noticed something about herself. The Wyholm returns went up in her hand as well. All of them. Every year since 1,829. She had copied them without ever once seeing where the line ran, because the figures came to her already added on a slip in Crispin's writing, and she had put them into a fair column and ruled them off and thought nothing whatever about it. There is a particular cold that arrives behind the breastbone when a person understands that they have been useful. The meeting broke up at 4. There would be a further meeting in the new year, when the accounts were fair copied and the apportionment drawn, and then the notices, and then the vote. Men stood about pulling on gloves and saying that it would all come to nothing. Kembleford came and took his minutes and thanked her, and his hand was shaking, and it had not been shaking on the steps. She got her cloak from the peg by the stair. Miss Sowerby. He had come the length of the room without her hearing it. "Your Grace," she said. "Chilcote's man told me the name. Not the rest of it. I have not been at Marlingford long enough to be told the rest of it, and I find I am not in a hurry. I am the niece of Mrs. Pargeter of Cold Harbor Grange," Honora said. "That is the whole of the rest of it, and it will take you 4 minutes to get it from anybody in that room, so I would rather you had it from me, and it were over." He inclined his head very slightly. "The gate is standing," he said. "It will not stand past Christmas. No." He glanced back down the room, where Crispin was rolling up the map with a good deal of care. "Miss Sowerby, do you take these minutes often?" "For Mr. Kembleford, yes. Since 1,832. And the tithe accounts. Honora put her hand through the slit of her cloak and found the pin, and did not look at him while she found it. "I write them," she said. "I do not make them. That is a distinction I should not have expected anybody in this parish to trouble with. It is the only distinction I have, Your Grace. I make rather a lot of it." She went out into the yard, and the cold took the breath out of her, and she walked the 2 miles home in the dark without a lantern, because there was not a spare candle in the house that would be missed. The house knew before she did. There were 4 servants left, and everyone had a mother or a sister in the village, and the village had been fetching ale up the stairs of the bell for 2 hours. By the time Honora had her boots off in the scullery, Sarah had had it from her cousin the potboy and told Cook, and Cook had told Mrs. Pargeter, because Cook had been at Cold Harbor since Honora's mother was alive and had learned early which way the wind kept. Lavinia was waiting in the passage with a candle. "You spoke to him." "He spoke to me," Honora said. I answered. "That is what speaking to somebody is." "The Duke of Aldringham." "Yes, at an inn, in front of 14 men. In that cloak. I was there to take the minutes. I could hardly take them in the yard." Lavinia's face in the candlelight was doing something Honora had learned to be afraid of years ago, which was nothing at all. When her aunt shouted, it meant she was angry. When her aunt went smooth, it meant she had already decided something. "Come into the parlor," she said. There was no fire in the parlor. Lavinia set the candle on the mantel and stood with her back to the empty grate as though there were one. "Men like that do not come into a parish and ask a woman's name," Lavinia said, and her voice was quite level. "They ask a man's name. If they want to know about a woman, they ask her father. And if she has no father, they ask her uncle. And if she has neither, then somebody says 'poor thing,' and the conversation moves to greenhouses. That is the correct order of things, and it has never once failed in my life. Then perhaps he does not know the correct order of things. He knows it better than you do. He was born knowing it, which is why, when a man like that puts himself out of order in front of 14 farmers, there is a reason, and the reason is not you." Honora said nothing, because for once she agreed entirely. Crispin came in at 7, and he was cheerful, and that was worse than anything. He was cheerful all through dinner. He said Chilcote was sound, and Bagnall would follow Chilcote, and the Whately trustees would follow anybody who wrote to them on good paper. He said the Duke would very likely be gone back to Suffolk by February, and that dukes never stayed anywhere in winter. He said, over the cheese, that he would want the 7 years begun in the first week of December, in the vestry where there was a proper table, and that he would come and read the figures out to save her the trouble of hunting them. "To save me the trouble," Honora said. "You will have your hands full enough forming the letters." Crispin cut himself a piece of cheese. 10 hours of column work in that hand of yours. "I do not know how you bear it." "By not talking while I do it," she said. He laughed, and Lavinia did not. And afterwards, when Crispin had gone up, her aunt stopped in the doorway with the coal book under her arm. "I have spoken to Sarah about the fires," she said. "There will be none above stairs until Candlemas. It is a hard winter, and coal is 26 shillings the ton delivered, and we are not made of money. Crispin promised me 200 weight. Crispin promises a great many things." Lavinia looked at her for a moment. "And you will have it, I dare say, when he wants something else. Do you know what became of your mother's sister, Honora? She died at Bristol. She died at Bristol in a house of industry, in a ward with 40 other women, because she had no husband and no property, and nobody in the family would take her, and I was newly married into it, and I was not asked." Lavinia's voice had not risen at all. "They are building a new one at Hereford this year under the new law, and it is a great deal larger and a great deal cleaner, and they will tell you that is progress. It is not progress. It is capacity." She shifted the candle to her other hand. There is no relief now for a woman who will not go inside the walls to get it. None, not a loaf, not a shilling, not a load of firing. So when you stand in an inn yard being spoken to by a duke, and you come home with your chin up and your mouth going, I want you to hold two facts in that head of yours at once, because you are supposed to be so very good at figures. She held up one finger. You are 26 and you have no property, and another. And the only roof between you and Hereford is the one I am standing under. She went up. Honora heard the door of the front bedroom shut, and then the house was quiet except for the wind coming in under the passage door where the felt had gone. She did not go up at once. She sat in the parlor in the dark, with her hands in her lap until the cold made her fingers ache. And then she did the sum, because there was nothing else to do with the night. She was 26 years old. In money she had 4 shillings a quarter from the parish and nothing else. And of that she had 11 shillings saved in a tin behind the chimney breast in her room, put by over 4 years. In goods she had 2 gowns, 1 cloak, a pair of boots that would want soling before spring, her mother's thimble, and a workbox with a broken hinge. In prospects she had none. She was not going to marry. She had known that since about 1832, and had made a kind of peace with it that she suspected was mostly exhaustion. There was no trade a gentlewoman could enter without ceasing to be one, and the 2 that were allowed her, governess and companion, both required a family somewhere to and say she was respectable, and the family she had was the one that would be asked. So the total was nothing. She had run it 100 times, and it came out nothing every time. And there was a strange steadiness in that, because a person who has nothing cannot be threatened with much. But that night, sitting in the cold, she found she had made an error in the addition, and had been making it for years. She was not worth nothing. She owned one thing. She owned 9 years of true figures in her own hand with the dates against them. Nobody else in that parish had such a thing. Kembleford's memory was going. Chilcote had never counted a bushel in his life. The farmers kept what was in their heads and a tally stick if they were careful. Crispin kept whatever suited him. And in the hop store at the back of Cold Harbor Grange, on a plank shelf, in a stitched quarto with a loose board, there was a record of exactly what had come off 2/3 of the ground inside a faded red line every year, since the spring of 1828, with the weather and the carter's name and the price at Ledbury. She did not yet know what it was worth or what it was for. She only knew, sitting there with her hands aching, that for the first time in 10 years the column was not empty, and that she had better not tell a living soul. The vestry at Marl Ashton was 12 feet square, with a stone floor, a table, a chest with 3 locks, and a window of clear glass with a crack mended with a strip of lead. It was the coldest room Honora had ever worked in, and she came to know it very well. They began on the first Monday in December. Crispin sat on the settle by the door, with the old books on his knee, and read the figures aloud, and Honora sat at the table and wrote them into the fair copy. And when a column was done, she read it back to him, and he said yes, and they went on. It was not an unreasonable way to do it. That was the thing she came back to afterwards, when it was too late to be surprised. A man who cannot write a clear hand and a woman who can, in a cold room with the light going at 3 and candles costing what candles cost. Of course he read them out. But she noticed things, because noticing was the only entertainment available. She noticed that he never gave her a book, not once in 6 weeks. If she put her hand out for a volume, he took it off the settle himself and held it up at a distance, or more often simply read the figure again slowly, as though she had not caught it. She noticed that he sat between her and the parish chest, always, even when the light would have been better on the other side. And she noticed, in the third week, something she did not know what to do with. He read out the Wyholm composition for 1,833 as 61 pounds and some odd shillings, and she wrote it. And half an hour later, he came back to the same year for a different column and read the same head as 61 pounds and the same odd shillings, and he had not turned a page to do it. He knew the numbers. He was not reading them at all. He was saying them. She wrote 1,833 out fair and did not lift her head. And something at the back of her neck went cold and stayed cold for the rest of the afternoon. And she told herself she was being ridiculous. And she went on writing. Because there was coal in it, and because there was nothing else she could have done with the thought, and because she had not yet had the one piece of information that would have made it mean anything. That came in January. But before it came, in the middle of December, on a Tuesday, the vestry door opened while Crispin was down at Bagnall's about a fence, and the Duke of Aldringham came in out of the churchyard with snow on his shoulders and asked whether the rector was about. "He is at Bosbury until Thursday," Honora said. "There is a burial." "Ah. Then I have ridden 4 miles to be told a thing I could have had from the sexton's boy." He looked at the table. "That is a great deal of paper. It is 7 years, may I?" She moved the candle without answering, which he seemed to take for permission. He did not do what she expected. She had expected the glance and the pleasant word and the retreat. Instead, he pulled the settle over with his boot, sat down at the corner of the table, took off his gloves, and read the top sheet all the way through. Then he said, "You have set the compositions and the motices in the same column." Honora put down her pen. "They came to me in the same column." "That is not what I asked." "No," she said, "it is not. They ought to be separate. A composition is an agreement to pay money in place of the 10th, and it can be altered, and it tells you what the parties settled on. A modus is an ancient payment fixed past memory, and it cannot be altered at all. Putting them in one column makes the 7-year average look tidier than it is, and it hides which parts of it are movable. And you have set them in one column." "I have written them in one column," Honora said, "because I am the copyist, and because the copyist who begins improving her instructions on the 3rd page is not a copyist by the 4th. The Duke turned the sheet over and looked at the back of it for no reason she could see. "There is a farm on the Wyholm side," he said, "called Dodmore. 11 acres of hops in 1,830, according to the survey I had made in the summer, and rather good ones. And the composition returned to my agent for that year was 6 pounds and 15 shillings. "That is not possible," Honora said before she could stop herself. It struck me as ambitious. 11 acres in 1,830 at 8 hundredweight. The acre would be near 80 hundredweight, and 1,830 was a poor year for quality, but a good one for weight. And the price at Ledbury was about 4 pounds the hundredweight for middling. That is 300 pounds of hops off that ground. The 10th of it is 30 pounds. She heard herself and stopped. Roughly, said the Duke. There would be deductions. There would be deductions of about 2 pounds, Miss Sowerby, not 23. Somebody outside was breaking ice on the water butt with the flat of a shovel. Why are you telling me this? Honora said. Because I came here to ask the rector whether he thought his parish was being cheated, and I have discovered on the way that the rector is at Bosbury, and the parish is being written out by a woman who can tell me the yield of a farm she does not farm in a year she was 20 years old. I have a book, Honora said. She had not meant to say it. It came out of her before the decision to say it had finished forming, and she felt the size of the mistake immediately, and sat very still. What sort of book? A garden book. What comes off our ground? I keep it for myself. It has no standing. It is not signed. It is not witnessed. It is a private memorandum in the hand of a woman with no property, and there is not a court or a commission in England that would look at it twice. That is a very complete list of its defects, he said. You did not mention any of its merits. It has one, Honora said. It is true. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the shovel went on ringing. My aunt tells me every morning, she said, that no man marries a column of figures. Then it is fortunate I came here to read one, said the Duke of Aldringham, and put his gloves back on, and went out into the snow, and left her sitting at the table, with the pen still in her hand and the ink drying on the nib. She did not go to the hop store that night. She waited 3 days, and afterwards she could not entirely account for them. She told herself the store was locked at dark, and the key hung in the kitchen, and Sarah would talk. That was true, and it was not the reason. The reason was that she had spent 10 years arranging her life so that it contained no questions she could not afford the answers to, and she knew perfectly well what she was about to go and look at. On the Friday, Crispin rode to Ledbury, and Lavinia went to Marlingford to sit with Lady Chilcote, which happened 4 times a year and took the whole afternoon. Honora took the key off the nail and went out across the yard in the dark at 3:30 with a lantern under her cloak. The store smelled of last year, dry and bitter, and faintly of sulfur from the kiln. She set the lantern on the plank shelf and got down the stitched quarto with the loose board and opened it flat. And then she took out of her apron the 4 sheets of the fair copy she had brought away from the vestry to finish at home, which she was not supposed to do and had done twice before without anybody caring. The fair copy gave the tithable produce of the Wyholm portion, year by year, farm by farm. The garden book gave what had come off the Cold Harbor hop ground. 2/3 of the Cold Harbor hop ground lay inside the red line. She began with 1,832, because 1,832 was the year she remembered best, the year of the long, dry June, when they had picked from the 2nd of September, and the sample had gone bright, and Rudge had made 4 journeys because the wagon axle went on the 3rd. The garden book said 31 pockets. The fair copy in her own writing said 12. Honora sat down on an upturned box. She had expected a discrepancy. She had rehearsed on the way across the yard the several innocent things one might mean. Some of the ground lay outside the line. There were customary deductions she did not know about. There was a second book somewhere with the working in it. She had not expected the number to be a third. She checked 1,833. The book said 26. The copy said 10. 1,831, 38 and 14. 1,830, 29 and 11. 1,800 and 29, 34 and 13. 1,835, 35 and 13. And 1,834, the bad year. The year the mold took the low corner, and they had got only 22 pockets off ground that should have given 35, and the copy said 9. She went through it twice with the lantern going low, and then sat with her hands flat on the plank shelf and understood that it was worse than theft, because theft is careless. A man stealing would have taken a different amount each year. He would have taken what he happened to need, and the figures would have wandered. These did not wander. Every year the declared crop was a little over a third of the true crop. Through a bad harvest and a good one, through the year the axle broke, and the year the price went to £6 too. Somebody had sat down with the real number and worked out a proportion of it, and written the proportion on a slip. It was not a man helping himself. It was a system, and it had been running for 7 years, and it was about to be made permanent. That was the part that took the longest to arrive. The 7-year average, fixed forever, on the same ground, at the same money. If the parish agreed it in the spring, the tithe of the Cold Harbor hop ground would be settled for all time at a third of what that ground grew. And the man it was taken from would have agreed to it in writing, and nobody would ever look again, because that is the entire purpose of a permanent settlement. 7 years of theft was a crime. 7 years of theft written into a rent charge under the seal of the tithe commissioners was an estate. Honora looked down at the 4 sheets on the shelf, neat, even, unblotted. Every figure formed the same way, the 7 with the bar through it that she had been taught by her mother. The 8 closed at the top, the shilling stroke slanted. 4 sheets of the cleanest hand in the parish. And she thought, with a clarity that was almost restful, that when this was found out, and it would be found out because the man it was being taken from had already been to Dodmore with a surveyor, then somebody would lay these sheets on a table in front of somebody else and say, "Look." And the first question would not be who read the figures out. The first question would be, whose hand is this? She had believed she was the copyist. She had made rather a lot of that distinction, standing in an inn passage with a duke. But there was no distinction. Crispin had never once given her a book. He had never once left her alone with the chest. He had sat between her and the parish records for 6 weeks and read out numbers he did not need to look up. And at the end of it, there would exist in the world a single fair authoritative record of 7 years in one hand, and it would not be his. She had not been useful. She had been chosen. She put the lantern out, locked the store, hung the key on its nail in the kitchen, and went up and lay in the dark in a room with no fire. Iris Venel had a nursery ground of 4 acres behind the forge, and she was the only person in Marl Ashton who had ever made money out of Honora's arithmetic and paid her for it. That was in 1831. Iris had come to the Grange to complain about a bill, and Honora had found 7 and 6pence in it that was not owed, and Iris had come back a week later with a pot of damson cheese and a proposition. A shilling a quarter to look over her book, and Honora to say nothing to anybody because a woman in trade who is known to have her accounts read by somebody else is presumed to be failing. 6 years of that had given Honora 24 shillings, of which 11 remained in a tin behind the chimney breast, and the knowledge that Iris kept the best records in that parish and possibly in that 100. She went on the Monday before Christmas with a basket, as though for bulbs. Iris was 63 and shaped like a barrel and had run the ground alone since 1826. She looked at Honora's face in the doorway and did not ask anything. She put the kettle on the hob, shut the inner door, and sat down. "You had better say it," she said. "I want to look at your book. The whole of it. 1829 forward. What am I looking for?" "Hops." Honora set her basket down. "Not yours. You do not grow them. You buy sets and poles, and you sell to half the growers between here and Bosbury, and you write down who you sold to and how much, and if a man buys 900 poles, in a March he is not planting 11 acres, he is planting 20. Iris looked at her for a long moment. "You have found something out about your cousin," she said. "I have found something out about my own handwriting." "That is not an answer." "It is the only one I can afford to give you today," Honora said. "If I am wrong, I would rather you never knew what I suspected. If I am right, I would rather you be able to say honestly that I never told you." Iris Venel got up and went to the press and took out 4 calf-bound books and put them on the table with a thump that shook the tea things. "There it is," she said. "Sit down and stop being noble at me. I am too old for it." They worked until 11 with the shutters closed. Iris did not keep a tithe account and had never cared what became of a tenth. What she kept was better. She kept sales. Every pole, every load of hop clay, every bushel of malt for the pickers, sold on credit to men who paid at Michaelmas, with the date and the name and the quantity and no charity whatever. And a hop ground writes itself into a nurseryman's book, whether the grower likes it or not. You cannot pick 30 pockets off ground you have not polled, and you cannot poll ground you have not bought polls for. By 9 o'clock, they had the Cold Harbor hop ground for 6 of the 7 years, and it stood exactly where Honora's garden book stood, and nowhere near where the fair copy stood. By 11, they had Dodmore, 11 acres, Iris said, tapping the page with a blunt finger. 1,830. 1,400 polls in the March and 22 bushels of malt in the September. And you do not brew 22 bushels for a picking crew of 9. That is 11 acres, and it is a heavy crop, and I could have told the world so at the time if the world had asked me. Nobody asked you, Honora said. Nobody ever does, said Iris. That is the arrangement. She closed the book and sat back and looked at the fire. 10 years I have had this ground, she said. Do you know what my husband left me? 4 acres, a debt of 30 pounds to the brewer, and a lot of men in this village who were very sorry indeed, and quite sure I would sell by the spring. He was a cooper, and a good one, and he could not write his own name, and he set his cross to that lease in front of me in 1,819, and I have never been ashamed of it for 1 hour. I did not sell. And the way I did not sell was written in those 4 books. Because when Amos Bagnall told the vestry in 1,828 that he had paid me, and had not, I could put my finger on the day. She said it without any particular feeling. Write it down, girl. That is the whole of the advice I have got. Write it down, and put the date on it, and keep it where nobody thinks to look, and one day some man will stand up in a room and say a thing that is not so, and you will be the only person alive who can prove it. I do not know that I can prove anything, Honora said. I do not know that anybody would let me. Iris got up to bank the fire. No, she said. They will not let you. You will have to be a great nuisance about it. She had to tell somebody with standing, and there was exactly one person in the parish who had standing and was not in it. Honora went to the rectory on the 2nd of January. Josiah Kembleford received her in the study with the fire lit, which was itself a kind of grace, and talked for some minutes about the frost and a christening at Bosbury, and she let him, because he was 71 and it was his house. Then she put the 4 sheets on the desk and told him. She did it in the plainest order she could manage. The red line and where it ran. The 7 years. What was in the fair copy. What was in her garden book and in Iris Vennel's ledgers. She did not say Crispin's name once. She had decided that on the walk down. She said the figures as they were given to me, and left the space where the name went empty, and let the old man put it in himself. He did not put it in. He sat quite still with his hands on the arms of the chair and looked at the 4 sheets for a long time without touching them, and Honora watched the color go out of his face in a way she had only seen once before, at a hayfield in 1,829, when a man went under a wagon. Sir, she said. You should not have brought me this, said Josiah Kembleford. I know it is a hard thing to be told. You do not know anything about it at all. He got up and went to the window, and when he spoke again, his voice had gone thin. The greater part of the tithes of this parish are mine, he said. Do you understand what that means for a rector of 71 with no private fortune? It means that if I take this up, I am not being public-spirited, I am being paid, and the first thing that will be said of me by every man in that vestry is that I have set the parish by the ears to enlarge my own living. Then let the Duke take it up. It is his loss more than yours. The Duke, said Kembleford, will be in Suffolk by March. He turned round. Miss Sowerby, I am going to tell you a thing I have told nobody, and I am telling you because if I do not, you will go on believing that I am a good man who is merely frightened." He sat down again heavily. "There is a charity in this parish. Adderley's gift, 1,691, £40 a year out of 2 closes at Bosbury, for the poor of Marl Ashton at the discretion of the rector and churchwardens. I have administered it since 1798. "Yes," Honora said. "I copy the account each Easter. You copy the account I give you." "The fire settled, my sister's son," said Kembleford, "in 1830. He was in a house at Worcester, and it went down, and he had put his name to bills he had no business putting it to, and if he had been taken up for it, he would have been transported. And my sister was dying at the time, and I did not tell her. I found £380. I had 90 of my own. The other 290 I took out of Adderley's gift between 1,830 and 1,833, and I have been putting it back at £20 a year since, out of the living, and I have £210 still to put back. And every Easter I hand you a paper with figures on it that are not true, and you write them out in that beautiful hand of yours, and I sign them." Honora did not say anything. "And in 1,833, he said, "Mr. Pargeter came to me about a matter of a boundary, and while he was here he mentioned, quite pleasantly, that he had been looking over the Adderley account, and that he could not make the Bosbury rents agree, and that no doubt there was an explanation. He has never mentioned it again. He has never asked me for a shilling. He does not need to." He lifted his head and looked at her, and his eyes were wet and perfectly steady. "That is why the greatest loser in this parish has sat in that vestry for 4 years and said nothing," he said. "Not because he is a coward, although he is. Because he is bought, and he was bought with the poor of his own parish, and he did it himself, and there is no undoing it now." Honora sat with the fire on the side of her face. She had come down that hill believing the difficulty was proof. She understood, sitting there, that proof had never been the difficulty. 4 people in Marl Ashton could have stopped it that winter, and everyone had a reason not to, and the reasons were not wicked. Kembleford had a debt he could not confess. Chilcote had a friendship and the gout. Iris Venel had a ground that would fail in a season if the growers turned on her. And Honora Sowerby had a roof. "What will you do?" the rector said. "I do not know," she said. Then he said, and it was the only truly kind thing he did that day, "I will not tell him you came." She thanked him and went out and got as far as the Lich Gate before she understood that he had not promised not to be asked. Crispin sent for her on the 6th of January. He did it properly, which was the frightening part. He did not come and find her in the estate office. He sent Sarah up to her room to say that Mr. Pargeter would be glad of a word in the parlor when she was at leisure. And there was a fire in the parlor, and there was tea. He had the 4 sheets on the table. "I took them out of the vestry drawer," he said. "You had left them. I had not left them. I brought them home to finish, and I took them back." "Yes. Sit down, cousin. Have some tea. It is perfectly good tea." She sat. She did not touch the tea. "You went to Kembleford," Crispin said. "I did." He nodded slowly, as though she had confirmed something mildly disappointing about a horse. "Do you know," he said, "I am not going to shout at you. Mother would shout. I have never seen the use of it. Shouting tells a person what you are afraid of, and then they know where you keep it." He turned one of the sheets round with 2 fingers so that it faced her. "That is your hand," he said. "Yes, all of it. 7 years, 34 pages when it is done, and there is not a word of it in any hand but yours. And the returns before it, back to 1,829. The greater part of those are yours as well, because my father's fist was gone and mine was never any good, and there was a girl in the house who wrote like a copper plate and cost nothing. He said it quite gently. Now suppose, he said, that somebody went to the commissioners in the spring and said there has been a fraud at Marl Ashton and the produce has been underestated these 7 years. What would happen? They would send a man down, Honora said. They would send a man down, and he would sit in a room at the Bell and send for the papers and spread them out. Crispin sat back, and then he would ask the room one question, and the question would be, who wrote this? Nobody said anything for a moment. Out in the passage, the long clock made the small grinding noise it made before it struck. You would say it was read out to you, he said. And that is perfectly true, and I should not even deny it. I should say, my cousin has assisted me for years. I read her the heads when I had them by me. She is a very capable woman, and I confess I did not check her work as closely as I ought, and I am ashamed of it. He picked up his cup, and then the man would look at you, cousin, and he would see a woman of 26 with no property, no husband, no fortune, and no character in the county but a name for a sharp tongue, who has had the running of 2 sets of books in this house for 7 years, who has been paid nothing for it, and who is therefore, as everybody in that room will instantly perceive, the one person here with a reason to have been at the money. That is not true, Honora said. Truth is not the material, Crispin said. Handwriting is the material. Truth is what people say the material means. He set the cup down. I am telling you this because I am fond of you in my way, and because I would rather not have to do it. There is no need for anybody to be ruined. In the spring the parish will agree a figure, and the figure will be confirmed, and it will be nobody's business ever again. And you will have your 200 weight of coal, and a good deal more besides. Because when this is settled, I shall be a man with 200 a year that he did not have before, and I am not ungenerous. And if I go to the Duke, Honora said. Then you will be a penniless woman who has gone to a duke, said Crispin. And there is only one construction this county has ever put upon that, and it will not require any handwriting at all. He gathered up the 4 sheets and squared them on the table. Finish the copy, he said. There are 11 days of it left. Owen Hasketh came down from Worcester in the 2nd week of January to survey the parish for the apportionment. And because the ground was frozen too hard to put in stakes, he spent the first 3 days walking it with a chain and a field book and a bad temper. Honora met him on the Wyholm Hill on the Thursday because Kembleford had asked her to carry up the old parish survey of 1,802, and because she wanted to see the red line on the ground. The Duke was there. She had known he would be. She had made herself acknowledge that on the way up, on the grounds that a woman who lies to herself about her reasons ends by not knowing what she has done. They were at the top of the slope where the ground turns over, and you can see the whole of the valley, the church, the roofs of the village, the black lines of the hop poles stacked in the yards, and away to the south, the long field of Cold Harbor with a gate at the bottom of it. Hasketh took the survey and grunted and got down on one knee in the frost with it. Honora stood and looked at the valley. You have been up here before, said the Duke. Every August of my life. Why August? Because you cannot see anything in January. Honora nodded at the slope below them. In August the vine is up, and you can see where a ground is doing well and where it is not, and you can see it from here better than you can from inside it. That corner under the wood goes yellow every year by the 2nd week. That has been drowned since before I was born, and nobody has ever cut a drain to it because the drain would have to cross Bagnall's land, and Bagnall's father would not have it. And what does that do to a valuation? It does this, Honora said. Mr. Hasketh will measure that corner, and it will go down as 4 acres of hopland because that is what it is. and the charge will be laid on it as 4 acres of hopland forever. Whoever farms it will pay on 4 and get 2, and in 30 years a man will stand where you are standing and say the tenant is a poor farmer. Hasketh, on one knee, said, "She is right about the corner." "I know she is right about the corner," said the Duke. "That is what is troubling me." He turned and looked down at the long field. "The line comes down there." "It comes down there," Honora said, "and it crosses the road at the gate, and it takes the top of the long field and the whole of the hop ground and the orchard as far as the barn, which is to say, it takes the only part of Cold Harbor that is worth anything." "Yes." He was quiet. "Miss Sowerby," he said, "in your judgment, and I am asking for your judgment and not for anything else, what is the tithe of that hop ground worth in an ordinary year?" She had done the sum 100 times in the dark. She gave it to him without stopping. "The ground carries between 22 and 41 pockets and has done since 1828, she said. "Call it 31 in a fair year. That is 4,600 weight. Middling price at Ledbury over the last 7 years has run between £3.18 and £6.2, and averages a little over £4.10. So the crop is worth about £210, and the tenth of it is 21. And after the customary deductions for picking and drying, you would look for something between £17 and £18 a year." "And what has been returned to my agent?" said the Duke. "I am the copyist," Honora said. "I do not make the returns. I did not ask you what you made. I asked you what was returned." She looked at the valley for a while. "Between £6 and £7, she said. Hasketh had stopped writing. The Duke did not say anything for a long moment, and when he did, his voice had changed in a way she had not heard before, and did not much like, because it was the voice of a man who has stopped being interested and started being certain. "Thank you," he said. "Your Grace." Honora turned to him. "I have told you nothing that is not in a public paper, and I have given you no proof of anything, and if you go down that hill and act upon it, I will not be able to help you. I have not asked you for help." "No," she said, "you have not. But you are going to." The Duke of Aldringham came to Cold Harbor Grange on the 19th of January without sending word. Honora was in the estate office. She heard the knocker, and then Sarah at a run, and then Lavinia's voice in the patch going up half a tone into the register she used for people with carriages, and she knew before the door opened what had happened, and she sat quite still with the pen in her hand and thought, in a detached way, well, there it is. They put him in the parlor and lit the fire. She was sent for after 10 minutes, which was long enough for her aunt to have got through the weather and Lady Chilcote and most of the Pargeter connection. He stood up when she came in. Lavinia was on the edge of the good chair with a look on her face that Honora had seen perhaps twice in her life, a kind of naked, greedy hope so unguarded that Honora had to look away from it. "Miss Sowerby," said the Duke. "Your Grace." "His Grace has done us the honor," Lavinia said, "of calling to inquire after the gate." "The gate," said Honora. "I had occasion to be on the Ledbury Road in October," the Duke said, in some difficulty, "and Miss Sowerby was good enough to direct me to the wheelwright. I have been remiss in not calling before. It was a decent lie. It was the best lie available." Honora watched him make it and understood exactly what it had cost him to think of, and it did not help at all, because a lie in a parlor is not addressed to the person it is told to. It is addressed to the room, and the room was going to talk about it for a fortnight. "Honora was mending a gate," Lavinia said with a little laugh. "She will do these things. I tell her there is no need." "There was every need," Honora said. "The post had rotted at the foot. I entered it in the estate book in November 1834, and again in the March, and again in August." The little laugh stopped. "I am sure His Grace does not wish to hear about posts." "On the contrary," said the Duke. And that was the moment it went wrong, and Honora saw it go and could not stop it, because he turned to her aunt and he said, quite pleasantly, Mrs. Pargeter, I have spent some weeks in this parish, and I have formed a view of it, and I hope you will forgive me for saying that Miss Sowerby appears to me to do the work of 3 men in this house, and to be thanked for none of it. I have found her the only person in Marl Ashton who can tell me a true figure. I do not think that is common, and I do not think it should go unremarked. The room went perfectly silent. Honora stood by the door and looked at the carpet, which was Turkey, and had been her mother's, and had a place near the window where the sun had taken the red out of it. Lavinia said, in a voice of great sweetness, "You are very good." They talked for 6 more minutes. The Duke asked about the orchard. Lavinia answered. Honora said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would not make it worse. At the door, with his hat in his hand, he looked at her. "You will forgive me," he said quietly. "I know what I have done." "No," Honora said. "Not yet." He went. They heard the horse in the yard and then on the road. Lavinia stood in the middle of the parlor with her hands folded. "You told him about the estate book," she said. "I told him the post had rotted. You told a duke, in my drawing room, in front of me, that this house has been in want of 2 shillings for a hinge for 3 years. I told him a post rotted," Honora said. "He knew the rest of it before he came in. He has ridden past this house all winter. He has eyes. He said you do the work of 3 men. I do. He said you were the only person here who could tell him a true figure," said Lavinia, "in my parlor, with my son in the yard. Do you know what he has done, girl? Or are you truly as clever as you think, and no cleverer?" She went out. Honora heard her go up the stairs and along the landing, and stop, and then come back down again, and go along the passage to the estate office. And there was the sound of the corner cupboard being opened, and a key. She got there in time to see it, and not in time to do anything. Her aunt had the strong-box open on the office table. It was her uncle's iron, 2 feet by 1, and it held the leases and the bonds and the deeds, and it had 2 keys, and Lavinia had one, and Crispin had the other, and Honora had never in 10 years had either. The garden book was in her aunt's hands. She had taken it off the shelf in the hop store. She must have gone out to the store while the Duke was in the parlor, in her house shoes, in January, in the frost, and come back in and stood in the passage with it under her shawl and waited. "That is mine," Honora said. "It was written in this house, on this estate, about this ground," said Lavinia. "And there is not a court in England that would call it yours." She put it in the box. She put it in flat, at the bottom, under the leases. And she closed the lid and turned the key and put the key in her pocket. And then she stood with both hands on the closed box and looked at her niece, and her face was not triumphant. That was the thing Honora could not get past afterwards. It was frightened. "You have made yourself interesting to a great man," Lavinia said. "I have watched women do that before. There is nothing at the end of it. Nothing. And in the meantime, you will not have one single thing in your hands that anybody wants." She went out and took the candle with her, and Honora stood in the dark in her father's estate office with her hands at her sides, and did not cry, and did not shout, and thought, with the part of her mind that never stopped adding, that there were 44 pages in that book, and that she knew every one of them, and that she had until the spring. Crispin hunted on the last Wednesday in January, and he hunted in his second coat, and the key to the strong-box lived on a ring in the pocket of his first. Honora had known that for years in the idle way a person knows the arrangement of a house. She had never had any use for it. She found Bat Nye splitting kindling in the woodshed at 8 in the morning and stood in the doorway until he looked up. "I want you to do something dishonest," she said. He put the hatchet down. "Right," he said. "I have not told you what it is." "It's you," Bat said. It'll be dishonest and it won't be wrong. Them's different. Honora discovered that her throat had closed slightly and dealt with it. There is a key in the pocket of Mr. Pargeter's brown coat, which is hanging in the gunroom. I want it at 9, and I want it back in that pocket before 1. And if anybody asks you what you were doing in the gunroom, I want you to say that I sent you for a shot pouch, which I am going to send you for, so that it will be true. And if the coat ain't there, then you come and tell me, and we do nothing at all, and you have your penny anyway. He had the key at 4 minutes past 9. She put a chair against the office door, which would not have stopped anybody and would at least have made a noise, and opened the iron box and took out the leases and set them aside in order. And there at the bottom was the stitched quarto with the loose board. She had 4 hours. She did not have time to copy 44 pages and did not need them. What she needed was the hop ground and the orchard, 1,828 to 1,836, and that was 11 pages. She wrote fast and small on both sides of the paper, and at the top of the first sheet before anything else, she put this. Copied out this 25th day of January 1,837 at Cold Harbor Grange in the parish of Marl Ashton. From the original book in my own hand, begun in 1,828, the said original being at this time in the iron box in the estate office, by me, Honora Sowerby, witnessed by Bartholomew Nye, who was present throughout and saw the original. "Bat," she said, "sit on that stool where you can see both books." "What for?" "Because in a while somebody is going to say that I made these numbers up in a back room," Honora said. "And when they say it, I want a person alive who can say he sat in this room and watched me copy them out of a book that was 10 years old. I can't write my name good." "Then you will make your mark, and I will write your name beside it," Honora said. And then she heard what she had said and sat still for a second with the pen in the air, because it had come out of her mouth in her mother's voice, and she did not know why. It was back in the coat by 12:30. The 11 pages went into an oiled wrapper under the third board, from the door in the potting shed at Vennel's nursery, because there was nowhere in her own house that was hers. Cornelius Witcher had his office in a court off Widemarsh Street in Hereford, up 2 flights. He was 52 and dry as a biscuit, and had been the Sowerby family attorney in her father's time, which is to say paid by her father until 1,826 and by nobody since. Honora walked it, 11 miles out on the Tuesday and 11 back on the Wednesday, and she stayed the night at a temperance house by the Wye Bridge for 10 pence, which took nearly the whole of what was in the tin. He knew her at once, which she had not expected. "You have your father's forehead," he said. "Sit down. What has happened?" It took an hour and a quarter. She had it in order by then and gave him the whole of it, the red line, the 7 years, the garden book, Iris Vennel's ledgers, Dodmore, the 11 pages under the potting shed board. She did not tell him about Kembleford and the Adderley charity, and she saw him notice that there was a gap and saw him decide not to put his hand in it. He asked her a great many questions. 2 of them were not about tithe at all. The estate itself, he said. "It came to Hugo Pargeter under your father's will in 1,826. I was 16. Have you ever seen the will?" "No," Honora said. "I was not shown it, and I did not think to ask. And by the time I was old enough to think to ask, I had understood that it was not a thing this family discusses." "That is not unusual," said Witcher, and made a small mark on his blotter, and did not explain what was not unusual about it. "There is no probate of a devise of land. It is not proved, and it is not registered, and it goes into a drawer." "Very well. Go on." Then he got up and stood at the window with his back to her for a while. "Miss Sowerby," he said, "I am going to give you the law, and you will not like it, and I am going to give it to you plainly, because I do not think you are a woman who is helped by being spared. Yes, take the fraud as proved. Under the Act, the parish may make a voluntary agreement, wanting the consent of the landowners to 2/3 in value and the consent of the tithe owners, and then it goes up to the commissioners at Somerset House and they confirm it. Then the commissioners may refuse it. They may. The agreement is not worth the paper until it is confirmed. And if they are shown that the parties proceeded on a false valuation, they will throw it out and send a deputy commissioner down to value the parish compulsorily on evidence, and that is a very different business and a great deal harder to arrange. Then that is what must happen. Yes, Witcher turned round. And here is the difficulty, and I want you to hear it once and not make me say it twice. The commissioners do not act on rumor, and they do not act on letters from the public. There must be an objection in writing from a party with an interest, a landowner, a tithe owner, somebody with a foot in the thing. I am the person who knows. You are the person who knows, said Witcher, and you are not a party. You own no land in that parish. You own no tithe. You hold no lease, and you pay no rent, and you are not rated. In the whole of this proceeding, Miss Sowerby, in the eye of the Act, you do not exist. Honora sat very still. Then somebody must lend me a foot, she said. That is one way of putting it. Who has one? Witcher counted on his fingers. Lord Chilcote, who will not, because your cousin is his neighbor, and his shooting is good. Mr. Kembleford, who owns the greater part of the tithe, and would gain most, and will therefore be least believed, and who by your face has some reason of his own besides. Bagnall and the rest, who will do what Chilcote does, and the impropriator of the Wyholm portion. The Duke, said Honora. The Duke. She looked at her hands. I have not the means to pay you, she said. I have 3 shillings and 6pence, and I owe 10pence of it for my bed. Witcher sat down and pulled a great ledger across the desk, and opened it and turned it round so that she could see. That is my clerk's work for the last quarter, he said. He is 19 and honest, and cannot add. There are 2 days in it. I will give you 7 and 6 and your dinner, and we will call the advice paid for. Honora Sowerby had been given a great many things in 10 years, and had hated nearly all of them. She looked at the 2 days of somebody else's bad arithmetic, and felt, for the first time since October, that the floor was solid. Give me the pen, she said. She was in the outer room on the Wednesday morning with the ledger and a plate of bread and butter when the stair door opened, and the Duke of Aldringham came in with his hat under his arm. He stopped when he saw her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The clerk, who was 19 and honest, looked from one to the other with his mouth slightly open. Go and get the letter book from Mr. Prosser, Honora said to him, and he went. You have been to Mr. Witcher, she said. I have been to Mr. Witcher 3 times since Christmas. Then you know what he told me. I know what he must have told you, said the Duke, because it is the same thing he told me from the other end. He put his hat down on the clerk's desk. He looked, Honora thought, extremely tired, in a way that had nothing to do with the ride. Miss Sowerby, he said, I am going to say something now, and I would be obliged if you would let me get to the end of it, because I have been trying to find a way to say it since the 19th of January, and there is not one. Say it. My agent is a man named Gorst. He has had the management of my Suffolk property for 11 years, and he is very slow and very thorough, and I have found him tedious my whole life. Last June he came to me with a paper about the Wyholm portion. Not about the Act. There was no Act in June. He had gone back through 20 years of receipts and found that from 1,829 they fell, and went on falling, and never came back, at a time when the price of hops in that county had not fallen at all. Honora set down her pen. I did not attend to it, the Duke said. It was £60 a year in a rental of some thousands, and I was in London, and it was June. I told him to write to Beeley, who held the lease, and Beeley wrote back that Marl Ashton was a poor parish, much decayed, and that was the end of it until August. The act. Because the moment it passed, every false figure in England was about to be set in stone forever, and Gorst came to me again and said so in 11 pages. So I turned Beeley off, took the impropriation into my own hand, and came down to see it. And before I came, I had a file made up, and there were 4 farms in it, and the first was Cold Harbor Grange. The room was very quiet. I came into this county on the 20th of October, the Duke said. I spent 3 days walking the boundary of that impropriation with the old survey in my hand, because I wished to see it before anybody in the parish knew I was looking. On the 3rd day it rained, and I sent the carriage round to take me up at the bottom of the long field, and the road gave way, and I came through a gap in the hedge and found a woman kicking a gate-post. Honora looked at the ledger in front of her, at the neat wrong columns of a 19-year-old clerk. "Whose gate?" she said. "Yours or your family's. It is all one to a survey. You knew who I was. I knew whose land I was standing on. I did not know your name until Chilcote's man told me at the bell 3 weeks later, and I have not looked at a paper about Cold Harbor Grange since that afternoon without knowing exactly what I was doing, and I did it anyway." He stood with his hands at his sides and told it in order, like a man reading out a schedule. "You came to my aunt's parlor," she said, "and told her that I did the work of 3 men. Yes. Do you know what it cost me? I did not then. I do now." He picked his hat up off the desk and put it down again. "I have been thinking about it for a fortnight," he said, "and I have got as far as this. I walked into your cage because I wanted to look at the bars. I told myself I was looking at the bars because I disapproved of them. And then, when I had had a good look, I said something admiring to the woman who keeps the key, in front of the woman who lives in it, and I went home to a house with 40 fires in it and slept perfectly well." Honora did not say anything. "I have had a great deal of practice at being welcome," said the Duke of Aldringham. "I have had none at all at being useful, and it turns out they are not the same skill. And I have been 48 hours discovering that a man may do a considerable amount of damage entirely from the inside of his own good opinion." There was a long pause. Then Honora said, "You had better give me the file. I beg your pardon. The 4 farms. Gorst's 20 years of receipts. If you have it at Marlingford, send it to Mr. Witcher, and I will sit in that room and go through it against what I know. And by the end of a week, you will have something you can put your name to." The Duke looked at her for a moment. "You are not going to shout at me," he said. "Your Grace," said Honora, "I have 3 shillings and 6pence, 2 days' work, and until the middle of March. If I spend an hour of it shouting at you, I shall have to make it up somewhere, and there is nowhere to make it up from." She turned the clerk's ledger back to the page she had been on. "Besides," she said, "you have told me the truth about yourself when you did not have to, and when it did you no good at all. I have had that from exactly 2 people in my life, and the other one was a nurseryman's widow. Sit down and stop standing about in a lawyer's office looking like a monument." The file came on the Friday, and it was very good. Gorst was, as advertised, tedious. He had the receipts of the Wyholm impropriation from 1,816 by farm, and had set against each year the average Ledbury price out of the county paper, which no agent in England had ever been asked to do, and which he had evidently done for his own satisfaction. By the Saturday afternoon, Honora had the whole shape of it. The understatement began in 1,829 and never varied. Not a fixed sum removed. A proportion. Somebody had taken the true crop every year and returned a little over a third of it, through a bad harvest and a good one, through the mold year And the year the price went to £6 too, and that was the signature. A thief takes what he needs. A system takes a share. On the Monday, going through the second bundle, she found the thing that broke the afternoon in half. It was not in Gorst's papers. It was in Witcher's. In a schedule of encumbrances that he had drawn up for a purpose she did not at first understand, and it listed the mortgage on Cold Harbor Grange, £1,800 at 4.5%, secured in £1,829, and 3 bonds after it amounting to £640 more, and against the whole of it, in the column-headed present holder, there was one name, Aldringham. She sat with it for some minutes. Then she went through to the front office, and Witcher looked up and saw her face, and put down his pen with the air of a man who has been dreading a particular knock at the door. When, she said, the 12th of January. He had it done through a house at Bath so that the name should not go about the county. He did not tell me. No, you did not tell me either. I am his attorney in the matter, said Witcher, and I am not yours. And I have been extremely uncomfortable for 3 weeks, and I am glad it is out. She went back and sat down and looked at the schedule until the letters stopped meaning anything. He came on the Wednesday. She had sent for him in 4 lines, and he had ridden 18 miles in sleet. Sit down, she said. I would rather stand. Sit down, Your Grace, because I am going to explain something to you, and I have found that a man takes a thing better sitting. He sat. On the 12th of January, Honora said, you bought £2,440 of debt secured upon Cold Harbor Grange. Why? Because your cousin has been living on that estate for 6 years on borrowed money and the interest is not being met. And because sooner or later somebody was going to foreclose and turn the whole household into the road. And I did not intend it to be a stranger. You meant it kindly. I meant it to be a wall, said the Duke. I have never in my life been able to do anything for anybody except by buying the thing that was standing on them. Yes, said Honora, that is exactly the difficulty. She laid the schedule on the table between them. Consider it as it will look in a room, she said. In the spring there will be an objection, and the commissioners will send down a deputy, and he will sit at the bell with the papers spread out, and I will be the person who says these figures are false, and here is how I know. And my cousin will stand up, and he will say 4 things. She turned down a finger. He will say, this woman wrote every page of the accounts she now impeaches. Another finger. He will say, she has been turned out of doors by her aunt, or is about to be, and is angry. A third. He will say, she has been sitting in an attorney's office in Hereford these 2 months, at the Duke of Aldringham's expense. And the fourth, said the Duke. The fourth is the only one that matters, Honora said. He will say, and every man in that room will feel the truth of it before he has finished saying it, that his Grace holds £2,440 of paper on the roof over her head, and that she is therefore not a witness at all. She is a tenant giving evidence for her landlord. The Duke did not move. It is not so, he said. It does not have to be so. She kept her voice level with some effort. That is the entire lesson of this business, and I have been 3 months learning it. Truth is not the material. Handwriting is the material, and a debt is the material. And what people say the material means is the only thing that ever gets into the record. She pushed the schedule an inch toward him. You bought that paper to keep a roof on me, she said, and in doing it you have made the only witness in Herefordshire worthless. There is nobody else. Mr. Kembleford cannot speak, for reasons that are his own. Mrs. Vennel's books are good, but she cannot tell you what came off my ground, only what went on to it. I am the evidence. And a fortnight ago you quietly bought me. The fire spat. What would you have me do? He said at last. And there was something in his voice that was not anger. I do not know, Honora said. That is the honest answer, and you may have it. But I will tell you what I have understood about you, since you were good enough to tell me about yourself in a waiting room. Go on, your power has exactly one shape, she said. It is the shape of a purchase. You do not know how to help anybody, except by owning the thing that stands between you and them. And it works. Your Grace, it works beautifully, 9 times out of 10. And that is why you have never once had to learn the other way. And this is the 10th time. This is the one place in the world where owning it is the same as breaking it. He stood up. Then he said, "Thank you," in a perfectly ordinary voice, and picked up his hat and went out. And she heard him on the stairs, and then the street door, and then nothing. Honora sat in the back room until the candle wanted trimming and did not trim it. The envelope came on the Saturday by the Hereford carrier, and there was no letter in it. There was a deed of assignment, engrossed on parchment, dated the 3rd of February 1837, executed and sealed, by which Gideon Rathborne, Duke of Aldringham, assigned the mortgage of £1,800 and the 3 bonds thereafter, being the whole of the encumbrances upon the estate of Coldharbour Grange, in the county of Hereford, unto Cornelius Witcher of the city of Hereford, gentleman, upon trust, with a direction that no step be taken upon the said securities without an order of the court, and that neither the assigner nor any person claiming under him should have any power to direct the trustee in the matter. There was a note from Witcher, 4 lines, saying that he had received the instructions on the 4th, that he had put to his Grace that the trust as drawn left him no control whatever over £2,440 of his own money, and that his Grace had replied that this was the point. There was nothing else in the envelope. No cover, no direction, not a word in his hand. Honora read the deed through twice, and then sat with it in her lap for a long time. She had told a man that his power had only one shape, and he had gone away and got rid of it in 3 days, without telling her, and had not sent so much as a line to be thanked for it. It was, she thought, the single most intelligent thing anybody had ever done to her. The draft apportionment came out for inspection on the 6th of February, and was laid at the bell, and Honora went down and read it, because it was a public paper, and because there was nobody in that parish who could have stopped her. She had gone to look at the totals. What she found was in the columns. An apportionment is 2 operations, and the second is where the bodies are buried. First, the parish agrees what the whole tithe is worth. Then that sum is divided among every field, according to what each field is judged to be worth, and each owner pays his share forever. The gross sum was low, and she knew why. The division was worse. Hasketh had measured honestly. She checked 20 of his acreages against the old survey and against her own feet. What had been done to his measurements afterwards, in the drawing up, was another matter, and the man who drew up the apportionment was Crispin. Coldharbour's hop ground, 26 acres of the best red marl in the parish, was charged in the draft at the rate of poor arable. Bagnall's 4 acres under the wood, the corner that had drowned since before she was born, was charged as prime hop land. The Whately trustees' meadow by the brook, which flooded 2 years in 3, was charged at meadow of the first quality. 9 cottage holdings on the Bosbury side, none of them above 6 acres, were charged between 1/3 and 1/2 above what their ground could carry, and one of them, Widow Shane's 3 acres and a pig, was charged at more than Coldharbour's entire orchard. Honora went through it twice, and then walked up to the nursery and put it in front of Iris Venel. "He has taken it off himself and put it on them," Iris said. "He has taken it off himself and put it on the 9 people in this parish who cannot read a schedule," Honora said. "And it is not for a year. It is forever. That is the thing they none of them have understood. Widow Chain will pay it, and her son will pay it. And when the money is gone out of the family, the charge will still be on the ground. And somebody who has never heard of any of us will be paying it in 1,900. Iris was quiet for a while. Then she said, "You cannot object." "No, I am not a party. I do not exist." "But they can." "Yes," Honora said, "they can, every one of the 9. They are landowners. They are parties, and their consent is wanted. And their 9 holdings together are not 1/100th part of the value of this parish. And Crispin has never once counted them, because 2/3 by value means a poor man's vote wastes nothing. Then what is the use of them?" "The use of them," said Honora, "is that they can stand up in a room and say a thing out loud, and a duke can put his name to what they said, and Somerset House will read it." She began the next morning, and it took her 11 days. She walked to all 9. She sat in kitchens colder than her own and explained a schedule to people who had never been shown one, and she did not once tell them what to think. She showed them Hasketh's acreage, then the sum against it, then the same 2 figures for Cold Harbor, and then she waited, and every time there was a long silence and then a very quiet question. Widow Chain, who was 71 and could not read, held the paper the wrong way up for a while and then handed it back. "Say the 2 numbers again," she said. "Say them slow. Then tell me what my Ned pays." The notices had been on the church door 21 days, and the meeting was called for 11 in the morning on the 2nd of March, in the church itself, because the long room over the tap would not hold them. It held 60 people, which Honora had never seen in that church on a weekday in her life. Chilcote took the chancel step with a chair brought down from the vestry and his stick across his knees. Beside him sat Ranulph Feltham, 57, a magistrate, one of the Whately trustees and chairman of the new Board of Guardians at Hereford, who had come because the Whately land was in the parish and because he liked to be where the paper was. Hasketh sat below with his field books. Kembleford sat in his own stall with his hands folded. The Duke of Aldringham came in at 4 minutes to 11 and sat at the end of the second pew on the north side, alone, and did not speak to anybody. Crispin stood at the reading desk with a draft in front of him. The 9 cottagers came in a body, which they had never done before about anything, and stood at the back by the font because there was no room. Widow Chain had her son Ned with her, and Ned had his hat in both hands. Honora sat at the little table under the north window with the parish inkstand because she was there to take the minutes. Nobody had thought to change it. Crispin read the draft for 40 minutes, and he read it well. He gave them the gross sum for the whole parish. He gave them the 7-year average, 1,829 to 1,835. He said it had been arrived at from the parish accounts, which had been kept in this parish by this parish for 30 years, and that the fair copy was on the table for any man to see, and that he did not suppose anybody present wished to sit through 34 pages of figures. And there was some laughter at that, and he turned the page. He said that Lord Chilcote consented, and Chilcote nodded. He said that the Whately trustees consented, and Feltham said that subject to the schedule he saw no objection. He said that Bagnall consented, and Bagnall said aye. He said that he consented for Cold Harbor. That, he said, is above 2/3 in value, my lord, and we may proceed to the tithe owners. Mr. Kembleford, said Chilcote. There was a pause. Honora, writing, did not look up. She had promised herself she would not look up, because if she looked at the old man he would know it, and he had troubles enough of his own making. I have no objection, said Josiah Kembleford. His voice was perfectly steady. It was the steadiness of a man who has had 4 days to decide and has decided. Your Grace, said Chilcote. The Duke of Aldringham did not stand up. Before I answer that, he said, I should like the parish to hear a matter of arithmetic. It will take a quarter of an hour, and it does not come from me. He turned his head. Miss Sowerby. 60 people turned round. Honora put down the pen and stood up beside the little table with the north light coming in behind her, and she discovered that her hands were perfectly steady and that she could not feel her feet at all. My lord, she said, I am not a party to this agreement. I own no land in this parish and no tithe, and I hold no lease, and my consent is not asked for, and could not be given. I do not ask to be heard as a party. I ask leave to do a sum out loud. Chilcote looked at the Duke, and then at Feltham, and then, being a man who had never wanted to be the one who said no, in front of a Duke, said, well, be brief. Honora had 3 things on the table in front of her. This, she said, is the fair copy of the parish tithe accounts, 1,829 to 1,835, which Mr. Pargeter has laid before you. It is in my hand. I wrote every page of it between the 5th of December and the 11th of January, and I was paid for it in coal. Somebody at the back made a noise. This is a book I have kept since 1828 upon the hop ground and orchard at Cold Harbor Grange, which is my own memorandum of what came off that ground, written in the week it came off, with the weather and the carter and the weight. And this is the ledger of Mrs. Iris Venel of this parish, who sells the poles and the sets and the malt, and who has had the goodness to bring it here and to sit with it and swear to it. Iris Venel, at the end of the 3rd pew, raised her chin about an inch. Now, said Honora, 2/3 of the Cold Harbor hop ground lies inside the Wyholm portion, and I did not know that until the November before last. And I should like every man here who thinks he knows where the tithe boundary runs on his own land to consider whether he has ever seen the map flat. Get on, said Crispin quite pleasantly. I am on, said Honora. 1,832. My book says the hop ground made 31 pockets. Mrs. Venel's ledger says that in the March of that year, we bought 3,400 poles and 26 bushels of malt offer for the picking, which will not do for anything under 25 pockets. The fair copy which Mr. Pargeter has laid before you in my hand says 12. She did not look at Crispin. She looked at Widow Chain's son, Ned, at the back, because he was the only person in the church who was looking straight back at her. 1,829, she said. My book 34, the copy 13. 1,830. My book 29, the copy 11. 1,831, which was the great year when Rudge carted 4 times, 38. The copy 14. 1,833.26. The copy 10. 1,834. When the mold took the low corner and we had the worst crop of my life, 22. The copy 9. 1,835.35. The copy 13. 7 years, she said, and not one of them at more than a little over 1/3, and no 2 at the same shortfall in money, because the price at Ledbury was £3.18 in 1,833 and £6.02 in 1,834. If a man were helping himself to a sum, he would have taken a sum. This is a proportion. Somebody has sat down every year with the true number in front of him, taken a share of it, written the share on a slip, and given me the slip. The church was entirely silent. Hasketh had stopped writing. Feltham was leaning forward with one hand on his knee, Crispin said, from the reading desk, and he said it gently, which was the worst thing he could have done, and he did not know it. You have shown us a copy of a private book. I have. Made by yourself. Made by myself. Then it proves nothing at all, cousin, and I am sorry for you. The original, said Honora, is at this moment in the iron box in the estate office at Cold Harbor Grange, where my aunt put it on the 19th of January with her own hands in front of me. Mrs. Pargeter is sitting in the 4th pew. There are 2 keys. She has one, and Mr. Pargeter has the other. My lord, I ask that somebody be sent for it. Every head in the church went round to the 4th pew. Lavinia Pargeter sat with her gloved hands in her lap and her back straight and her chin up, and she looked at her niece for what felt to Honora like a very long time. Then she took the key out of her reticule and held it up between 2 fingers without a word, and Chilcote said, "Somebody go." And Batnai was out of the south door and across the churchyard before anybody had finished turning round. It took 22 minutes. Nobody left. Kimbleford sat with his eyes shut. The boy came back at a dead run with the stitched quarto in both arms and put it into Lord Chilcote's hands. And Chilcote, who could not read a bushel from a bowl and knew it, handed it straight to the rector. "Mr. Kimbleford," said Chilcote, 1,832, if you please. The old man opened it and turned the leaves with his thumb and found the year. And there was a pause while he got his glasses, and then he read it out in the voice he used for the lesson. 1,832. Picking begun the 2nd of September, ended the 14th. Long dry June. Sample bright, carted by Tom Rudge in 4 journeys, the axle going on the 3rd. 31 pockets. Sold at Ledbury the 9th of October at £4.10 the hundredweight. He closed the book. "That is the same hand as the fair copy," he said, "and that book was begun in 1,828, and I have watched this woman write in my vestry since 1,832, and it is hers." Chilcote said, "Good God, there is a second matter," said Honora, "and it is worse, and it will take 4 minutes." Feltham said, "Go on, madam. The gross sum is one operation. The apportionment is another." Honora put her hand flat on the draft. "Mr. Hasketh has measured this parish honestly, and I have checked 20 of his acreages against my own feet, and he is right. What has been done afterwards with his measurements is not his doing." She read it out. Cold Harbor hop ground, 26 acres of red marl, charged at the rate of poor arable. Bagnalls 4 acres under the wood, drowned, since before I was born and known by everyone in this church to be drowned, charged as prime hopland. The Whately meadow by the brook, which floods 2 years in 3, charged as meadow of the first quality. And 9 cottage holdings on the Bosbury side, none above 6 acres, charged between 1/3 and 1/2 above what their ground can carry. She turned the sheet. Widow Chain, 3 acres and a pig, charged at 16 shillings and 8 pence. Cold Harbor Orchard, 11 acres, charged at 15 and 4. She let it sit. "That is not a mistake," she said. "A mistake goes both ways. Every error in this schedule runs downhill in the same direction, off the land of the men who drew it, and on to the land of the people who cannot read it. And it is not for a year. It is a rent charge upon the soil forever. Widow Chain will pay it, and Ned will pay it, and when there is nobody of that name left in this parish, the charge will still be on those 3 acres. And some stranger will pay it in 1,900, and no man alive will be able to say why." Bagnall stood up at the back and said, in a voice of pure outrage, 4 acres under the wood as prime hopland. "Sit down, Amos," said Chilcote. "I will not sit down." The Duke of Aldringham stood up. "My lord," he said, "I am the impropriator of the Wyholm portion, and I am asked for my consent, and I do not give it." He came forward and laid a paper on the table by Hasketh. "That is my objection in writing, addressed to the Tithe Commissioners at Somerset House, and it goes up by tonight's post. I have signed it. And since it will be said in this parish by the end of the week that a duke has come down here and overset a parish agreement out of his own cleverness, I would like it in the minutes that there is not one figure in that objection which came out of my head." He looked round the church. "The evidence is Miss Sowerby's." The name at the bottom is mine, and it is mine for one reason only, which is that the act will read my name and will not read hers," Chilcote said, into the noise. That the meeting was adjourned, and hit the arm of the chair with the flat of his hand 3 times before anybody heard him. And then Crispin Pargeter, who had not moved from the reading desk, said, quite clearly, over the top of all of it, "Before we go, my lord, there is a question that ought to be asked while we are all here, and I do not think anybody else in this church is going to ask it." The noise fell away. He came down from the desk, and he took up the fair copy from the table, and he held it, and he did not raise his voice at all. "Nobody has disputed one word my cousin has said about these figures," he said. "I do not dispute it now. Something has been done to the accounts of this parish these 7 years, and I say plainly before God and Lord Chilcote that until this hour I did not know it. There was an intake of breath somewhere at the back. But I put it to you, my lord, and to Mr. Feltham as a magistrate, that we have all of us this morning been so taken up with what was written that not one of us has asked the first question that any court in England would ask." He turned the fair copy round and held it up at arm's length, open, so that the light fell on it, and turned slowly so that the whole church could see the page. "Whose hand is that?" he said. Nobody answered. "It is hers," said Crispin. "She has told you so herself, twice, freely, and I honor her for it." 34 pages, and the returns before it, back to 1,829. The greater part of those are in the same hand, and they went up to the tithe owners over my father's signature, and then over mine, because my father's fist was gone, and mine was never any good. And there was a young lady in the house who wrote like a copperplate and would do it for nothing. He put the book down. "I have been a fool," he said, "and I do not much mind saying so, because I would rather be thought a fool than the other thing. I did not check her work. I signed what she gave me. For 7 years I signed what she gave me." Honora heard, from a long way off, a sound she recognized and could not for a moment place, and then placed. It was the sound of 60 people deciding. "That is a lie," she said. "It may be," said Crispin. "I have said what I know. Mr. Feltham will find out the rest, and I shall assist him in every particular, and I will open every book in that house to him this afternoon." "Feltham," said Mrs. Pargeter. Lavinia stood up in the 4th pew. She was 58, and in her black, with her hands folded in front of her, and she looked exactly, Honora thought with a terrible detached clarity, like what she was about to claim to be, which was an elderly widow who had trusted the wrong person. "My niece has kept the books of my house since 1,829, she said. "She has had the whole of them. She has had them at all hours, in that office alone, and I have never once looked at a page of them, because I was brought up to believe that a woman does not go behind her own family. I do not understand figures, sir. I have never understood them. I understood that she was clever and that she was grateful." She turned her head and looked at Honora, and her eyes were bright with something that was not tears. "And I have thought this winter that she was growing very strange," she said. Feltham stood up. He was a fair man, as such men go. That was the thing Honora had to admit to herself afterwards. He did not shout, and he did not accuse her of anything, and he did not enjoy it. He said that a serious question of fraud upon the tithe owners had been raised and partly admitted. He said that the parish accounts, the fair copy, the draft apportionment, the memorandum book, and Mrs. Vennel's ledgers were to be sealed that day and lodged at the Bell against the coming of an officer from Somerset House, and that he would write to the commissioners himself by the same post as his grace. He said that until the matter was gone into, nobody who had had the handling of those accounts should have the handling of any other paper in the parish, and that he was sorry to say it and meant no imputation by it. and he said that Miss Sowerby should hold herself ready to be examined. Then he took the stitched quarto with the loose board off the chancel step and put a wafer on it and pressed his seal into it. And Honora watched 10 years of her own handwriting go under a stranger's seal and understood that she had just done the one thing she had told herself all winter she must not do, which was to hand over everything she owned in a room where she had no standing. She was not turned out that night. She was let out. There was no scene. Honora came back at 4 in the afternoon, and her trunk was in the passage, packed, and her aunt was standing in the parlor doorway with the coal book under her arm. Mr. Feltham says nobody who has had the handling of the accounts is to have the handling of any paper, Lavinia said. That is a public officer's direction, and I shall obey it in my house. The direction was about the parish books. The direction was about you, said her aunt. You have stood up in the church of this parish and told 60 people that the accounts of this house are false, and I have heard my son called a thief in the mouths of men who eat his bread, and whatever comes of it now, whatever comes of it. There is no morning after this one on which you and I sit down at the same table. There is not if you are proved an angel. She stood aside from the door. The carrier will take the trunk wherever you send it, she said. I will not be told where. Honora stood in the passage of the house she had been born in and looked at the place near the window where the sun had taken the red out of her mother's carpet, and at the letter scales on the table in the estate office, which had been her grandfather's and had weighed her keep in ounces every morning for 10 years. Then she picked up the smaller of the 2 bags and went out, and it was raining. Iris Venel put her in the seat house because it was the only room on the ground with a stove. It was 12 feet by 8 with a brick floor and trays of last year's stock in racks to the roof, and it smelled of paper and dust and the sourness of stored bulbs. Iris brought out a straw mattress and 2 blankets and a candle and stood in the doorway with her arms folded. You will not sleep, she said. No. Good, sleep is no use to you this week. She went and came back with bread and a piece of cold bacon and went again. Honora sat on the bench with the blanket round her shoulders and did not eat. She had by her own count 3 shillings and 9pence, 2 gowns and a cloak, a pair of boots that had wanted soling since Christmas, and 11 pages of copied figures under the 3rd board of the potting shed, which were now worth nothing at all, because the original they were copied from was under Ranulph Feltham's seal at the bell, along with everything else. And a very good name for a sharp tongue in a parish where 60 people had watched her aunt stand up in church and say that she had grown very strange this winter. The Duke came the next morning at 9. Iris let him stand in the yard among the frames because she had no room fit for him and no intention of pretending otherwise. And Honora came out with the blanket still round her. Come to Marlingford, he said, or to Suffolk. Lady Chilcote will have you today and be delighted, and if that will not do, my aunt at Bury is 70 and deaf, and would take you tomorrow, and neither of them would ask you a question. No, said Honora, you slept in a seed house. I slept in a warm seed house, which is more than I have done since 1834, and I want you to listen to me, because you have got this wrong again, and I have not the time to be gentle about it. He shut his mouth. If I go to Marlingford, she said, I am a young woman in trouble taken in by the neighboring peer. If I go to Suffolk, I am the same thing 140 miles away, and the parish will say I have run, and Feltham will write it down as I have run, and every soul in Herefordshire will know within the week what a woman means when she leaves a county after a thing like that has been said in church. Then let them. You cannot let them. Honora pulled the blanket tighter. That is what I keep failing to make you understand. You can be talked about and go home. I cannot go home. There is no home. The talk is the whole of what I have left, and I intend to spend it very carefully. Also, she said, everything is at the bell. Every book, every ledger, the copy, the draft, my own memorandum. It is under seal 200 yards from where I am standing, and there will be an officer down from Somerset House inside 6 weeks, and when he opens that seal, I intend to be in the parish. The Duke stood in the yard with his hat in his hand among the seed frames. "What can I do?" he said. "Nothing," said Honora. "That is the answer, and I am sorry for it, and you will find it is the hardest thing anybody has ever asked of you." He went. She watched him go down the lane past the forge, and then she went back into the seed house and sat down on the bench and put her face in her hands, for the first time since October, for about a minute and a half. Then she stopped and got the candle end lit and began to think properly, which she had not done since the 2nd of March. The problem, stated plainly, was this. Everything that could prove she was a copyist and not a fabricator was sealed up in a room at an inn. She would not see any of it again until a stranger opened it in front of Crispin, and by then Crispin would have had 6 weeks and the run of every drawer at Cold Harbor. So the question was not what is in the box at the bell. The question was what is written in my hand somewhere in this parish that is not in that box and that nobody has thought about. She went through it the way she went through a column, slowly from the bottom. The household ledgers, in the box. The tithe returns, in the box. The estate book, in the box. The minutes of the parish meetings since 1832, under seal. Iris Venel's ledgers, under seal. She stopped. There was one more. She had been 22 years old, and it had been the autumn of 1832. And Josiah Kembleford had come up to the Grange himself and sat in the parlor and explained to her uncle, with a great deal of unnecessary apology, that the parish register books were in a shocking state, that the earlier volumes were sound enough, but that the loose papers and the rough entries of the last 10 years wanted setting out fair before the archdeacon came, and that his own hand was no longer equal to it, and that he would pay a shilling a week. She had worked at it in the vestry all that winter, with the parish chest open beside her and a stone bottle of hot water at her feet. Baptisms, marriages, and burials, 1,824 to 1,830, copied fair, entry by entry, from the rough books and the loose slips, in her own hand, signed at the foot of every page by Josiah Kembleford, rector, as a true copy, and sealed with the seal of the parish. Honora sat quite still on the bench in the seed house, with the candle guttering in the draught from the door, and heard her own voice from 6 days before, saying to a church full of people that the fair copy was in her hand, and that she had written every page of it and been paid in coal. Whose hand is that? It was, she thought, a question with more than one answer, and Crispin had only asked it about one book. Witcher came down on the 4th of April with the notices from Somerset House hot in his pocket and a great many questions, and with one paper that Honora had not asked for. Crispin had offered, in front of a magistrate and 60 people, to open every book in his house. A man who has said that cannot afterwards refuse to produce a deed. Witcher had given notice for the title of Cold Harbor Grange on the 20th of March, and it had come, and he had brought it because he was a careful man and because it was the first thing he had seen in 3 months that did not concern hops. "It is a plain enough devise," he said, spreading it on the table in the parlor of the Bell. "Your father to Hugo Pargeter, absolutely. It is the sort of will a man makes when he has a daughter of 16 and no son and a brother-in-law he trusts, and it is not a good will, but it is not an unusual one." Honora read it for the first time in her life. It was on 2 sheets, dated the 4th of June, 1826. Her father had died on the 19th of October in the same year, and she remembered the 19th of October very well. At the foot of the second sheet there were 3 names, signed by the said Roderick Sowerby, in the presence of us, who at his request and in his presence have hereunto set our names as witnesses. Thomas Kirkham, Susanna Kirkham, Barnaby Venel. Honora sat down. "Mr. Witcher," she said, "how many witnesses must a will have, where it gives land?" "3," said Witcher. "It has been 3 since the Statute of Frauds, 1677. 3 credible witnesses, present together, signing in the presence of the testator. And I may tell you that it is about to be 2, because there is a bill before Parliament this session that will alter it, and I have a client in Ross who has been waiting on it since Michaelmas." "3," said Honora. "3. Why?" "Because Mrs. Venel's husband could not write his name," she said. "She told me so herself in her own kitchen in December, sitting by her own fire. And she was not talking about wills. She was talking about a lease he set his cross to in 1819, and she said she had never been ashamed of it for 1 hour." Witcher had gone extremely still. "And," said Honora, "he has been 10 years dead." She was at the vestry door when Kembleford opened the church that afternoon, and she asked him for the parish chest, and he did not ask why. He got the 3 keys off the nail and turned them himself and stood back. The rough burial book for 1826 was where it had always been, and beside it, in a fair binding, was the volume she had made in the winter of 1832, Marriages and Burials, 1824 to 1830, entry by entry, in a hand she had been 22 years old when she wrote, signed at the foot of every page by Josiah Kembleford, rector, as a true copy, and sealed. She found the year and put her finger on it. Barnaby Venel, of this parish, Cooper, aged 58 years, buried the 19th day of March 1826, J. Kembleford. Honora Sowerby sat down on the vestry floor in her cloak, with her back against the parish chest, and made a sound that was not a word. 2 months and 16 days, she said when she could. He was in the ground 2 months and 16 days before, the day he is supposed to have picked up a pen he could not use. Kembleford had his hand on the corner of the table and had gone the color of the wall. "I buried him," he said. "I buried him myself." I read the words over him. "Yes, and in October I read them over your father, and in November I sat in that parlor and drank the Pargator's sherry." He sat down slowly on the settle. 10 years, he said. "Nobody looked," said Honora. Witcher gave it to her, without any softening which she had come to like about him. "Take it as proved," he said. "The will is void so far as it devises the land, and it is void because a will of real estate wants 3 witnesses and this one has 2. And the third neither signed it nor could have signed it nor was alive to be asked. There is no saving it. It is not a defect that can be cured by anything, because the man is dead and was dead. Then what happens to the land? The devise fails, and the land descends as if there were no will at all. Your father died seized of Cold Harbor Grange. He left no son. He left 1 daughter." Honora put her hands flat on the table. "Say it plainly," she said. "Cold Harbor Grange has been yours since the 19th of October 1826, said Cornelius Witcher, "and no pargator has had 1 hour's lawful title to it. And every shilling they have borrowed on it, they borrowed on your land." Neither of them said anything for a moment. "Why did nobody find it out?" Honora said at last. "In 10 years, nobody." "Because nobody looks," said Witcher. "A will of land is not proved. It goes to no court and no register. It is handed over, the land goes with it, and the only occasion on which any human being reads the attestation clause with attention is when somebody sues. In 826. The person entitled to sue was 16 years old, orphaned, living in the house, and dependent upon the very people who would have been sued. He gathered the sheets. They needed a third name, and they took a man buried that spring, because a dead man cannot be sent for and cannot contradict. And by the time anybody thought to wonder, there would be nobody left who remembered whether he could write. It was not clever. It was only safe. It was safe for 10 years, and it would have been safe forever. He looked up, and I may add that if that bill passes as it will, 2 witnesses will be enough from the 1st of January next. Had your uncle been born 11 years later, he would have wanted only 2, and there would have been nothing whatever for you to find. The bell went at 20 past midnight on the 6th of May, 4 days before the deputy commissioner was to sit. Honora heard it from the seed house and was in the lane in her cloak over her shift before Iris had the door open, and half the village was out by the time she reached the churchyard wall, and the south door of Marl Ashton Church was standing open with a lantern on the step. Batnai was sitting on the bottom step of the tower with the bell rope still swinging above him and his nose bleeding. He slept in the ringing chamber 3 nights a week and had done since Christmas, because the sexton was 68 and paid him in kind to be there for the frost, and everybody in the parish knew it except, apparently, Crispin Pargeter. He had a light, Bat said. He come in the vestry door with the sexton's own key that hangs in the porch, and he had the chest open, and I come down the ladder, and he took me by the coat, and I got the rope. "Which chest?" said Honora. "The parish chest, miss. He had the old burial book. The rough one. The old one with the leather. And then he went out the north gate, and he had it under his arm, and I couldn't hold him. Miss, I'm sorry. I'm that sorry. He had it, and he never dropped it." Honora knelt down on the step and took the boy's face in both hands and turned it to the lantern to see his nose. "You rang the bell," she said. "In the dark, with a grown man holding your coat, you got to the rope. Do not tell me you are sorry." Witcher, arriving at 7 in the morning, was less consoling. "The rough book is gone," he said. "That is the original. Yes, there is a transcript sent yearly to the bishop's registry at Hereford, and yes, it will show the same entry, and no, I cannot have it here by Wednesday. It is a bound file in a diocesan registry, and it wants a proper application and a fortnight. And the deputy commissioner sits in 4 days and Feltham with him. Then we go without it," said Honora. "You have nothing. He has burnt the original by now." "I have something," she said. She went to the vestry and took the fair volume of 1,824 to 1,830 off the shelf, where it had sat since the winter she was 22, and put it on the table in front of him, and opened it at the page, and set her finger under the line, and then turned to the foot of the page where the old man's signature was, and the wafer, and the pressed seal of the parish of Marl Ashton. "He took the rough book," she said, "because he thinks the rough book is the record. It is not. It is the notes. This is the record. It is signed and sealed as a true copy by the incumbent. It has stood in that chest for 5 years, and every page of it is in my handwriting." Witcher looked at it for a long moment. "He asked a church full of people whose hand that was," said Honora, "and I have been 3 weeks answering him, and the answer is that it is mine, and that there is a great deal more of it about this parish than he ever troubled to count." Ambrose Tull, deputy commissioner, sat at the long table in the room over the tap at the Bell and Hop Yard on the 10th of May, with Ranulph Feltham on his left as a magistrate of the county, the seals broken in front of him, and the books ranged along the table in the order they had been taken. He was 45 and gray and entirely without ceremony, and he had valued 40 parishes since August, and did not care in the smallest degree who anybody's cousin was. The room was full. Honora had asked him for 3 things, and he had granted 2 and thought about the third for a long time. The first was the ink. "Mr. Tull," she said, "will you take up the fair copy and hold it to the window and turn it, all 34 pages, and tell this room what you see?" He did it. It took 4 minutes and nobody spoke. "It is 1 ink," said Tull. "1 ink, 1 paper, 1 nib to my eye, and no variation in the color from the first page to the last that I can detect." He turned it again, "And the paper is all of 1 make, and it is a Hereford make, and it is not 4 years old." "It purports," said Honora, "to be the accounts of 7 years, kept year by year, 1,829 to 1,835. If those pages were what they claim to be, the ink of 1,829 and the ink of 1,835 would not be the same color. Nothing kept over 7 years looks like that. That book was written out in 1 season by 1 person from a paper somebody put in front of her. And I am the person, and I told this parish so in March," Feltham said. "When did you buy the paper, Mr. Pargeter?" Crispin said that he could not be expected to remember. Then Bat Nye stood up at the back with his cap in his hands, and Tull made him come to the end of the table, and he told it in 9 sentences. That he had been sent to Hereford in July before the harvest. That the order was 6 quires of foolscap and 2 bottles of ink, all of 1 sort, and he was to say it was for the estate. That Mr. Pargeter had given him 2 shillings for going. "And you have the bill," said Tull. Bat put his hand inside his shirt and brought out a folded paper, soft with a year of handling. "Miss Sowerby told me," he said, "when a man gives you a paper, keep it. She told me that in the hop store. I put it in the tea caddy with the rest." Tull read it and passed it to Feltham without a word, and Feltham read it and set it down, and looked up the length of the table at Crispin Pargeter for what felt to everybody in the room like a very long time. The second thing Honora had asked for was 5 minutes on a matter that was not tithe at all. Tull said it was not his jurisdiction. Feltham said that he was sitting as a magistrate and that it was his, and that she might go on. She put the will on the table and the fair register beside it, and she did not make a speech. "That is my father's will. It gives Cold Harbor Grange to Hugo Pargeter. It has 3 names at the foot of it, because a will of land wants 3. That is the register of burials of this parish. Fair copied by me in 1,832, signed as a true copy by Mr. Kembleford, and sealed. The 19th of March, 1,826. Barnaby Venel, Cooper, aged 58. The will is dated the 4th of June, 1,826. She stepped back from the table. "Mrs. Venel is sitting behind me and will tell you that her husband could not write his name and set his mark to everything he signed in his life," Iris Venel said. From the second row, in a voice like a dropped stone, "He could not." "And that is the whole of it," said Honora. Josiah Kembleford stood up and said that he had buried Barnaby Venel and read the service over him and would swear to it, and sat down again and put his hand over his eyes. It was Lavinia who broke it, and she did not break the way Honora had imagined in the seed house at night. She did not weep, and she did not deny it. She stood up in the middle of the room and said, in a hard, clear voice that carried to the stairs, that her son had been 23 years old in 1,826 and away at Bristol, and had known nothing whatever about it, and that whatever was to be done about a will made 11 years ago should be done to the people who made it, and that one of them was in his grave at Marl Ashton, and the other was standing here. "Feltham," said Mrs. Pargeter, "I must caution you." "Caution me," said Lavinia. She was looking at Honora. "Hugo drew it," she said. "He drew it in the September, when your father was already past speaking, and dated it back to the June." And Kirkham and his wife were in debt to us for £40, and did as they were bid. And we wanted a third, and there was not a third to be had who would hold his tongue. And so, said Feltham. And so I found one, said Lavinia Pargeter. I went through the burial book. That is all. I looked for a man buried that spring who had no son to remember him, and no wife who would ever be asked a question by anybody, and I took his name. And I have never once in 11 years thought about him from that day to this, and neither has anybody else, which is precisely why it worked. She turned her head. You told this parish in March, she said, that no man had ever asked whose hand a thing was written in. You were quite right. And I will tell you what I have learned this morning at 58 years of age, which is that I chose a dead man because a dead man cannot be sent for. And there was nothing else in the whole of England, said Honora, that could have made you wrong, except a girl of 22 being paid £1 a week to write down that he was buried. Lavinia's mouth moved. You said it to me every morning for 10 years, Honora said. No man marries a column of figures. I said it. You were right, said Honora. No man ever did. But a court will read one. Crispin Pargeter was taken into custody on Ranulph Feltham's warrant for forging and uttering the parish accounts and stealing the burial register of Marl Ashton, and was committed at the summer assizes. Ambrose Tull refused the voluntary agreement, valued the parish compulsorily on the evidence, and directed a fresh apportionment on Hasketh's measurements without alteration. Widow Chain's 3 acres were charged at 4 shillings and 2pence. Kembleford's tithes came out at nearly twice what he had been receiving. The Duke of Aldringham sat through 5 hours of it in the 3rd row and said one thing. Tull asked him, at the end, whether he had any interest to declare touching the witness. None, said the Duke. I held securities upon that estate. I assigned the whole of them to a trust in February, with a direction that I could not touch them, and Mr. Witcher has the deed. I do not own the roof over Miss Sowerby's head. I have no power to put her out of it or keep her in it, and nothing she has said this morning was said by anybody's tenant. Then he sat down again, and that was the entire contribution of the 6th Duke of Aldringham to the proceedings. The action to recover the land was brought in June, and nobody defended it. Honora went back to Cold Harbor Grange on the 9th of July, which was a Thursday, and walked up the drive with Witcher's clerk behind her carrying a box, and let herself in at her own front door. Lavinia was in the parlor. There would be a settlement. Mrs. Pargeter to have the Northon cottage on the Bosbury Road for her life, and £40 a year charged on the estate, worked out one evening in the seed house and never altered since. It came to about what the coal had cost, over 10 years, in that house, for one person. I will not thank you, Lavinia said. I have not asked you to. You have got everything. I have got what was mine, said Honora. That is not the same. And you, of all people, know the difference, because you have spent 11 years in a house you had no title to, and I do not believe you slept well in it once. Her aunt said nothing. There was one other account settled that summer, and it was never written anywhere. Honora went down to the rectory in June with a sheet of paper on which she had worked out that £210 at 30 a year would be cleared by 1,844, and Josiah Kembleford, who was 72 by then and had not slept properly since January, read it and wept and did not thank her. What she asked in return was not money. She asked for the parish chest, unconditionally, for as long as she lived. Then she went to the estate office. The letter scales were on the table, where they had always been, her grandfather's. The small brass pan and the little weights, and she picked them up and looked at them for a moment, and then carried them into the parlor and set them down in front of her aunt. Keep the scales, she said. She went out to the yard and stood in it. The Duke of Aldringham asked her in the 3rd week of July, in the hop ground, with the vine 6 feet up the poles and the whole of the valley smelling green. He did it badly, which she liked, and he did not offer her anything, which she liked better, because he had at last understood that a man who offers a woman a thing has put a price on it whether he means to or not. Honora said yes, and then she said, "And there are terms." "Of course there are terms. I have been married in law since 1826, without knowing it," she said. "Not to a man, to a set of rules. Cold Harbor Grange came to me the day my father died, and it was in another family's hands for 11 years, and I was never once asked. I do not intend to hand it over a second time by the simple act of standing up in a church. Say it." "A settlement before the marriage," said Honora. "The whole of Cold Harbor to trustees, to my separate use, with a restraint upon anticipation, so that it is not yours and it is not mine to be persuaded out of, and it cannot be reached by any creditor of yours or of mine, or by any charm of yours whatever. Mr. Witcher will draw it, and I will write the trusts myself, and he may correct my grammar." The Duke of Aldringham thought about it for approximately 4 seconds. "Send it to me when it is engrossed," he said, "and I will execute it, and I will not read it first." "You will read it first," said Honora, "because I have put in a clause about the gardens that I am not prepared to argue about afterwards." They were married at Marl Ashton on the 12th of August, 1837. It was 6 weeks after the new registration came in, and 8 weeks after the young queen came to the throne, and the parish had been given a fresh volume for the purpose, ruled and numbered and entirely empty, in which marriages were to be entered in a form settled by Act of Parliament. Theirs was the 4th entry in it. Josiah Kembleford, whose hand shook so badly by then that it took him 4 minutes, wrote it out himself and would not be helped, and Honora signed her name beneath it in the hand that everybody in that church had by then heard about, and Iris Venel signed as a witness, and Bartholomew Nye, aged 13, signed as the other, having practiced it for a fortnight on a slate. There were 3 names at the foot of the page, because Honora had asked for 3, and the rector had said that 2 were now sufficient in law, and she had said that she was aware of it. She went out in September, alone, with the stitched quarto under her arm, to the ground below the wood where the vine was coming down. She sat on the corner of the wagon and wrote the date and the weather, and then the lines she had written every autumn since she was 18, the number of pockets that had come off that ground, and after it, for the first time in 9 years, the name of the person the crop belonged to. Honora Sowerby had not been rescued. That was the part the parish never quite got right, and it was told wrong at Ledbury Market for 20 years. There was a version in which a duke rode down out of Suffolk and set the thing to rights, and it was a better story, and it left out the 11 miles walked in February and the shilling a week in a cold vestry in 1832. She had not won because a rich man stood beside her. She had won because for 10 years, while she was told every morning that she was worth nothing, she had gone on counting. They took her land, her name, her fire, and her place at the table. The one thing they never thought to take was what she had written down and dated, because it did not occur to any of them that it was worth anything. A woman with no property, had no vote, no title, and no standing in any room in England in 1836. But the law does not ask who held the pen. It only asks whether what the pen wrote was true. That was the error. They believed that making her the copyist made her a tool. But a copyist remembers. A copyist writes the day of the month at the top of the page. And 11 years after a girl of 22 was paid a shilling a week to set down that a cooper had been buried on a Sunday in March, that one line brought a family down. This is not a story about the good being rewarded. It is a colder thing than that. It says that where a person is given no power, the nearest substitute is a record. That patience is not endurance, it is bookkeeping. That you may take everything from a woman except what she knows and has written down. And the man learned something dearer still. Gideon Rathborne was born to a power with only one shape, the shape of a purchase. He bought the debt on her house to shelter her, and very nearly destroyed her with the gift. The wisest thing he did in the whole affair was to sign a deed stripping himself of it, tell nobody, and then sit in the third row of an inn on a Wednesday in May with his hands in his lap for 5 hours while she talked. Love, it turns out, is not clearing the road ahead of somebody. Sometimes it is only standing far enough back that when they speak, the words are counted as their own.